Hello everyone, and welcome to the Open Science Global Mini Symposium organized by the IMFAHE Foundation and the University of Valladolid. My name is Maria Soriano. I am the Vice President or co-founder of the IMFAHE Foundation, and I want, on behalf of all the organizing team, to really wish you to enjoy this conference and to learn a lot about open science. And now I just want to give the floor to the Vice Rector of Internationalization of the University of Valladolid, Paloma Castro, and then we'll talk the President of IMFAHE Foundation, Zafira Castaño. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. It is a great pleasure to participate at this opening session of the Open Science Global Mini Symposium. Welcome to you all. It is great to see such a large audience, which is a clear evidence of the interest of this topic. I would like to start by highlighting that this event is possible thanks to the strong and valued collaboration between two institutions, IMFAHE Foundation and the University of Ayadalis, that for more than 5 years have been working together to enhance quality in academia by sharing knowledge and developing international mentorships. The topic of this symposium, Open Science, widens new ways to undertake and disseminate research, education, and innovation in interaction with society. For universities, open science represents a culture change. For this transition to happen, which is complex and multidimensional, there are indeed profound challenges to face. In this journey towards open science, we wondered how to support our researchers to engage with practices that imply more connected, reusable, and open data for the benefit of society. With this symposium, it is our desire to enable the researchers to become familiar with open science practices and also to help universities to make the necessary transformation to deliver the change in culture in the area of open science. The University of Ayadalis is committed with this challenge. And that is one of the reasons why this mini symposium is so important for us. We have identified the need to support our researchers towards the transition to open access. We need to be prepared to fulfill the expectations and to provide suitable tools and services for our researchers. The University of Ayadalis is a public university with a long tradition going back almost 800 years ago. It was founded in the 13th century, making it one of the oldest universities in the world. It is located in Castilla y León, a region with a rich cultural heritage in the Midwest of Spain. We offer a wide variety of degrees in all the fields. We are a comprehensive university with approximately 22,000 students. We are very proud to be a university committed to achieving excellence in research and innovation as key factors for sustainable growth. The University of Ayadalis is recognized for its research excellence, supporting the knowledge generated in its institutes, centers, groups, and labs. It has 18 research centers, 12 research institutes, and 178 research groups in all the fields. We also have a scientific park that promotes initiatives to encourage entrepreneurship through advice and support for the creation of companies, spin-offs, and provides university students with cooperation opportunities with companies to transfer their work, prototypes, patents, or applied research. It is our purpose to provide a supportive environment where ideas are generated to conduct impact-oriented research through a network of partnerships and collaborations. In this sense, internationalization is viewed as an integral part of academia and science. Just to give you an example of international collaboration is the participation of the University of Valladolid in the team that worked with the NASA on the Perseverance rover on Mars. The system of calibration of the SuperCam, the instrument at the top of the perseverance mast, was provided by the University of Ayadalis. To finish, I want to take this opportunity to thank you all the participants, the audience, the speakers, and the organizers for making this event happen. As someone once said, change can only take place where there is trust, collaboration, and commitment to a shared vision for the future. With this symposium, we are on the track. Hope you all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paloma, and welcome from our side. My name is Zafira Castano. I am the president of IMFAHE Foundation, and University of Valladolid is one of the universities with whom we have been collaborating in the past years. Together with European universities, IMFAHE has created an innovative platform of excellence that includes universities like University of Valladolid, La Laguna, Europea Miguel de Cervantes, Oviedo, Politécnica de Valencia, Málaga and Sevilla in Spain, and also University of Aveiro and Minho in Portugal. We are working together and we are bridging knowledge and collaborations with companies and also with local governments, because we want to promote international knowledge flow. We want to promote open science, open collaborations, innovation, and career profile of excellence. In this platform, European platform that we have built in the past year with all of these universities, there are more than 1,000 members in the fields of biomedicine, engineering, economics, and behavioral science, where you can find top students, top professors, and top professionals at prestigious international organizations in 5 continents who are willing to collaborate, look for more collaborators. Some examples of the programs and initiatives that we are running and that you can find in our website that is mentioned in here is, first of all, our IMFAHE Connects, the platform of talent where everybody is colliding and is looking for collaborators, that goes from in United States at Harvard University, MIT, and other places like in China, in CEPSA, in Australia. All of them are connecting, but also they are working together. They are applying for competitions like the Nodal Award, where we want to transform one idea, one scientific idea, into a company. And we give them the tools and also funding, the seed grants. Also, they have the opportunity to accelerate all of those things and become more mature before they get closer to venture capitalists. In our platform, we provide online courses to promote innovation and scientific careers and career development. And we have a special course for training for professors that is staffed by international professors from other institutions in the world. We provide personalized mentorship and career support to students, professional internships at elite organizations like, for example, Harvard University or MIT, where 60% of our students are attending and are trained. And also there are companies interested in this talent. So we match students with companies who are looking for this talent. We try to bring as well the latest scientific trends to the universities and the countries where we operate, and we do it through different activities and also our annual innovation camp. So as I say, if you want to learn more about our activities, please go to our website. The goals of this mini symposium, that as you can see, we try to create a very well organized agenda with 5 different panels, speakers that are coming from 3 different continents and that are starting from the West Coast of United States, going to the East Coast of United States, Portugal, Spain, and also they are connecting from Australia. The speakers will have around 45 minutes. In those 45 minutes, we want them to present tools, to present their organizations and the work that they do. And then always we are going to leave 10 minutes for Q&A because we want you to ask questions. We want you to interact with all of them. So please don't be shy. Ask so many questions as you want, even if you think that they are naive questions, because for us, every question is a cry to understand the world. The goals of the symposium are as follows. Paloma.
One of them is knowledge, is related to knowledge. So to learn about initiatives that promote open science, open data, and open communication.
The second one is tools. We want you to access to relevant tools for early stages of planning when applying for grants.
And the third goal is debate, positive discussion about pros and cons, as well as the efficiency that we will need to fill in our scientific community.
So for this debate, we encourage you to go to the Q&A that should show up on the top of your computer and write and type any question that you might have during the speakers when they are speaking or at the end. We will read at the end of the presentations all of those questions, and we will have that interactions with the speakers. Also, we want to remind you that we identify several organizations around the world that promote open science and that we found very interesting. We have been giving visibility and showing you videos about the work that they do in the past days. And we want to highlight the work of Add-Ons that promotes open science by sharing useful research materials worldwide. Repro for Everyone shares resources for reproducibility. Everybody knows how important is reproducibility in research. Protocols, secure platform for developing and sharing reproducible methods. CrowdFight, a collective initiative to catalyze scientific collaborations. Finally, UVA Divulga, scientific culture unit of the University of Valladolid. Finally, if you want to be up to date to all of the things that are happening in this conference or new events that are coming, just follow us in your favorite social media and you will find information. And please don't hesitate to include in Twitter at IMFAHE Mini Symposium any comments that you want to share with the audience. So after this, I want to introduce our first speaker, who is David Mayor. He's the Director of Policy Initiatives from the Center for Open Science. He's connected from Virginia in the United States. David Mayor leads the policy and incentive programs at the Center for Open Science in order to reward increased transparency and reduce bias in scientific research. How important, right, are the bias? Before that, before coming to the Center for Open Science, he was the Director of Advising in the Division of Life Science at Rutgers University. And he worked with citizens, scientists to design and implement authentic scientific research. It's a great honor having you with us today. The floor is yours, David.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. Let me take over the screen here. And I will go into full screen here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be a part of this great conversation. As was mentioned, I'm from the Center for Open Science. Our mission is to increase trust and credibility and reproducibility of scientific research. And we have three main activities that we do at the Center for Open Science in order to achieve that mission. A lot of our work is meta-science, attempting to find markers of credibility or reproducibility or attempts to replicate previously published literature. And barriers to that process that are identified go into our advocacy, our policy work, our training in order to overcome and solve those barriers. And then finally, we build tools and infrastructure to help enable the practices for which we advocate. So that'll be a main focus of my presentation today, to talk about specific steps and tools that are useful to implement these types of practices. We have a broad mission at the Center for Open Science to improve and to change research culture, and we follow a pattern of making tools that are enable the type of activity we want to see happen. We work to improve those to make them fun and easy to use. And then a lot of our work is about normalizing these practices so that you see your peers doing it, you can emulate what they're doing, you can discuss whatever methodological difference is normal to discuss. we can start to specifically work with decision makers and policymakers at journals, at publishers, at academic societies, at foundations, private and public funders of research, and at research institutions to make sure that these types of practices are specifically recognized and rewarded in the process of getting published, getting funded, getting hired. And eventually these types of activities can be required when the time is right to do so. We're involved with a number of different communities on specific steps for each of those layers of the pyramid, so to speak. Most of what I'll be talking about today is kind of at the bottom, making something possible, making something easy, in order to have the most practical recommendations for the audience here today. I won't be able to help myself though. Some of the activities I'll be talking about are some of the communities that we work with, or some of the workflows that policymakers are implementing at various institutions. So again, let me start off by focusing mostly on tools that make open science possible and make it easy. And every now and then I'll be touching on communities and specific incentives for the type of activities we want to see happen. A lot of what we deal with is addressing issues of low rates of reproducibility. I don't have time today to go into a lot of the great work that's been going on for the past 10 or more years that really have led up to that. So we can talk about that maybe in the Q&A if there are questions, but let me just take it as a given right at the beginning that there are many barriers that arise when one tries to replicate the results of previously published work. Sometimes that is small method sections that are just too brief, too incomprehensible. Sometimes there are questionable research practices, just basically bad practices that lead statistical inference to not work the way it should, such as only reporting the results of tests that look most promising, not the failed tests that are a little bit harder to explain. Sometimes when one tries to replicate previously published research, it comes out with a different answer. That can simply just be more noise. That could be another false negative. So it's hard to differentiate between what's true and what's not. And finally, when you try to replicate the results of previously published work, and it comes out to a different finding, there could be some important difference between an original study and a new study. And that could be a new discovery that's explaining that difference. In order to address some of those top issues, open science can really address those problems. Good use of reporting guidelines and complete sharing of data or materials can highlight the precise methods that were used. Questionable research practices can be addressed through complete reporting, through specifying in advance precisely how work will be done and giving a place to report those results no matter how they come out. And that way, those explanations for low reproducibility in red can be minimized because all the tools and all the information and all the best practices occurred originally. And then the only thing that's left are those new discoveries. If you're coming to different conclusions, there might be some environmental difference. There might be some difference between the groups of people you're looking at. Those unexpected differences are the real discoveries that we're trying to make much more easy to obtain through open science practices. So if one take-home message if you have today is open science practices can eliminate bad reasons for low reproducibility and focus efforts on productive conversations between older results and newer results. Last part of my introduction, I sometimes just like to clear the air just to emphasize the points of open science that we focus on at the Center for Open Science. Not to say that open science is a big umbrella and there are many things such as open access and other conversations that are worth having, but most of the things that we are talking about and then I'll be focusing on are sharing underlying raw data, sharing research materials, whether they're physical or digital materials, and having clear research plans, specifying in advance how a study will be conducted and having a place to report those results no matter how they turn out. For example, null results or statistically significant results. These are the three pillars that we emphasize at COS and that I'll be talking about. So a little bit of an overview of what I'll be going into. Some of the rationale for open science is, as I've talked before, kind of noble, trying to increase reproducibility, but some of the reasons are pretty straightforward, leading to better citation rates, more fundable research. So I'll get into some of those, let me just say selfish reasons, but that's fine. I'll then be talking about some of the places there are to implement some of these open science practices. I'll specifically be giving some more details about the platform, the open source platform that we build and maintain, the OSF. I'll be giving some very practical recommendations for creating data management plans and using informed consent documents. Those are just some very common tools that are helpful to have in your arsenal so that you can get started at the next project on the right foot. These might be the types of things that you're asked to do immediately by your funder. And finally, I'll be talking a little bit about pre-registration, register reports, and some issues and some recommendations for implementing that. First, why open data? Why open science? There are lots of reasons. You might be asked to by your funder or by your publisher. We've seen quite a bump in citation rates when open data are available. And essentially, a lot of these open science practices are to help curate your own work so that when a new student comes into the lab or you want to build off something that was done 3 or 4 years ago in your lab, it's ready to go. It's easier to get forward. We've seen several studies recently that come out in the past several years that see a citation advantage between comparable studies that have openly available data or not. So I'm not aware of any sort of randomized controlled trial that's really looked for a causal difference between these. And so these observational studies see different citation rates between comparable, hopefully comparable pairs of studies with or without open data. Suffice it to say, the causal reason might be hard to infer, but we are seeing studies that have openly available data or materials be more useful and therefore more citable in the research literature. So that's something that lots of folks care about, and you should too, just to see that work get used. It's really why we're in the business here. If you're like me, it's hard to be organized. This isn't a screenshot of my desktop, but on my worst days, it feels like it. And open data, a lot of these open science practices are just really meant to force one into getting one's ducks in a row, so to speak, organizing one's work so that others can take a look at it. That's kind of the incentive of open science, is that you realize that others might be taking a look at that. And so going from something like that to a well-organized, well-curated directory with data sets that others can take a look at and draw the same conclusions that you're drawing from the data set are going to help you make a better argument, and they're going to help you as you build upon that work for the next stage of the project, or if you put it down for a couple of years, it'll be ready to go much more easily and quickly. We see a lot of journals and funders taking steps into open data and other open science practices. We evaluate journal policies. I'll get a little bit more into this later, but this is the Top Factor. Topfactor.org is a database of journal policies as they relate to the top guidelines, which are a set of standards and recommendations for journals to implement. And the data transparency column is specifically looking at evaluating the degree to which a journal requires data transparency. And I don't have too much time to go into a lot of the details here, but let me just quickly say that 0, 1, 2, or 3 are the possible scores, and the higher the score, the more rigorous and the higher the mandate is. There's level 3s there. Somebody's actually checking to make sure that the data work as expected. Level 2s are the real policy mandates that we see coming out through various journals. Whereas level 1 is just the requirement for a data availability statement. And level 0 is what we see quite frequently, an encouragement to share data or saying nothing at all. So we see lots of those still these days, but 1, 2s, and 3s are increasing. We're keeping track of what funders are expecting in terms of open science and open data policies. So this is a curated resource for funders and for researchers to see what they have on the horizon. And here are several examples of funders taking specific steps on these actions. So this is available on our website, and I'll be sharing a lot of links at the end you can take screenshots of, but this is a resource both for funders to learn from each other about what they're doing, and for researchers to see what's coming down the pipeline for work that they want support for. Places to share data. The best repository of or listing, I would say, of data repositories is the Re3Data, the Registry of Research Data Repositories. You can really go dive deep into that Re3Data registry to take a look at how many repositories are available. Many of them are listed by discipline, and many of them are listed by kind of feature. Sometimes there are specific types of data sets or files that you want to be able to share. And Re3Data does a great job of curating that information for discovery. This, again, I'll be providing a link to this later, or there at the bottom of the screen is a link to this. There are other repositories that provide a specific service that we advocate for. It's called protected access. One of the main barriers to openly available data are, of course, sensitive information, potentially identifiable or re-identifiable information. So sometimes it's only appropriate to share a data set when it's when there's some sort of ethical check or protected access between letting that data be publicly posted and getting it to a legitimate researcher who has ethics training. We maintain a list of repositories that provide that as a service. So they will have staff members who are available to vet requests for data access. Finally, the repository I know best because I work here, the Center for Open Science builds and maintains the open source OSF, Open Science Framework. And the vision behind the OSF is a place to manage a research project that's connected to a persistent repository for data, a persistent repository for research materials, a place to quickly disseminate findings through preprints, and at the beginning of the cycle, a place to plan research projects and to submit study designs to a registry. I'll be getting to all those steps in a few minutes. So let me show you a little bit more about that. The OSF is a place to manage an entire research workflow from the beginning conceptual stage of what one is expected to do, to providing a space to add collaborators within one's lab or within collaborating labs, a place to preserve and connect different parts of the research workflow, and to quickly disseminate findings via preprint servers. Here's just an intro look to a OSF dashboard. When you create a new project, it'll give you options of where the data should be stored. EU requirements dictate that data generated in the EU should stay in the EU, so there are servers that are available to researchers in Australia, in the EU, in Canada, and in the United States, and more come online periodically. But those are very helpful for keeping the data where they were generated. It's faster if you don't have to download a data set from across the world, but of course, it's also in line with local data protection guidelines. The basis of OSF is here on individual projects, and individual projects are the place that one focuses most of their time in order to organize the research and then do with it what they want. You can add contributors by typing in their name or email address and give them different levels of permissions based on how much you trust that individual and what they should be doing on it. The metadata on any individual project ensures that these can be discoverable and preserved. So the authors, the description, license information, and we have sort of guidelines on how to appropriately license these data set or these projects. We encourage openly available licensing as much as possible, either public domain, CC0, or Creative Commons by attribution, CC BY, but there are other ones, of course, that are available. It helps to curate data sets by giving specific places in an OSF project to put different parts of the project, the methods, the data, the analysis scripts, whatever they could be. And it's designed to be private by default. All the work that's conducted is again private until you make the decision that it's ready to be made public. And the philosophy behind this is that getting everything ready at the end of a project when you're sick of it and you just wanted to submit it for publication, having an additional huge step to curate and get everything ready for sharing is a huge barrier, and it frankly won't happen unless you're extremely motivated to do it. But if the project that you're working on is itself in the repository and is designed to help manage the project and then make publicly sharing as easy as clicking a button, that button's right there. So make it public when one is ready to make it public, but not before. And there are different there are different fine-grained details that you can make public or keep private. So perhaps for whatever reason the data just can't be made public for legal or ethical constraints, you can make different parts of the project public at different times to different people. When it's ready to disseminate, then there's a quick and easy way to add preprints from a project you have. So just upload the Word document and click add a preprint, and then that preprint lives in the same place that the data set, that the analytical scripts or the other materials live as well. A couple of practical tips. These very frequently come up in grant applications early on in the project. There are a lot of good resources out there for helping one create a data management plan and helping make sure that your data collection is going to be as ethically sound as possible, creating truly informed consent so that research participants trust that the work being conducted is will be shared appropriately. A lot of the guidelines for sharing data we see coming out through the literature. Michelle Meyer has this great paper that gives a lot of practical recommendations that we integrate into various parts of the OSF. So when considering a project and figuring out how to share data, there are a couple of guidelines, a couple of strong recommendations to keep in mind. Make sure that you don't promise to destroy the data. We see that information, we see those lines showing up in a lot of US documents all the time, because that was kind of best practice a few decades ago, and that stays in there. Don't promise that you're not going to share the data. Don't promise that the research analysis will be limited to the specific research questions or specific topics, because that, of course, is a real limit to how applicable the research should be. And we see, I don't have the evidence right here cited, but at the end, there are recommendations for how to make sure that this is all being done in a way that conveys to the research participant something that they can understand and that they can agree to in a truly ethical way. And we see through survey data that research participants generally do want, they don't care about the number of citations that a paper gets. They care that the research data that they're providing gets used by as many scientists for the most benefit as possible. So highlighting these needs are a way to often honor the research participant. Do make sure that consent is obtained, obviously. Incorporate these data retention clauses into ethics review board templates, and be very thoughtful and very mindful about the risks of re-identification. This is pretty well known in the research community these days, but as you can probably, if you're not very familiar with a lot of that information, a couple pieces of demographic information, your postal code, your job, your ethnicity, your age, 3 or 4 of those can often be used to triangulate somebody's identity, especially for underrepresented members of the public. So please be mindful when sharing data with that type of demographic information included. We provide recommendations and templates of existing ethics documents that have all of these considerations taken in mind. So you don't have to start from scratch there. Creating a data management plan. I see there are questions coming up. I can't see what they are right now. I'm just going to take one moment to see if there's any clarifying questions I should address right at this moment. Otherwise, I'll make sure that there's time at the end. So let me just click on
it's
what
okay, David.
Okay.
It was technical problems. Thank you.
We provide recommendations for what types of information and what answers to provide in a data management plan, how will file formats be created, who will have access to it, and how will they be preserved. There are specific recommendations for creating data management plan at dmptool.org, and our help documents have specific templates that you can use to generate that data management plan. So feel free to take a screenshot of this. Again, all of these links will be made available at the end as well. When deciding to share a data set, there are several best practices to keep and recommend to have under consideration about creating file names and organization structure that is readable by somebody else, or that somebody else is frankly often going to be you 4 years from now when you don't really remember exactly what you did. So the guidelines, recommendations for how to name files and how to organize them presume that the person going into this will either have forgotten or will have never seen it before, and they can guide one into exactly what was conducted and how to extract the data and use it again. A couple of very basic recommendations: keep one directory for one project. Keep your raw data pristine. Don't do analyses on the raw data set. Anytime any analysis, any test can be pulled from that raw data. And so those derived data sets, you can junk up as much as you want, but the best practice is to keep that raw data raw. Separate the code from the data so that they don't get so they can be sort of individually cited and used. And these README files are just directories, and there are lots of examples of these online, but just provide the right instructions for, again, somebody else to take a look at. Oftentimes they will include the what's called the code book, the description of every variable in the data set. And again, on these resources, there are examples of how to create a data dictionary or a data code book and the types of things to consider. Basically, you're trying to make sure that some obscure variable name has a definition, a very precise definition that not only the machine can read in the code, but that somebody else can understand. In my last few minutes, I'm going to emphasize a couple of points on how to create a pre-registration and why to do so. Pre-registration is a process of submitting a study plan to a registry prior to conducting the work. And the purpose of pre-registration is to make a clearer distinction between the hypothesis testing confirmatory work and the hypothesis generating exploratory discovery research. Both of these are equally valuable, but it's very easy to go from one mode to the other without knowing it. When one is hypothesis testing or confirming, these results are held to very high standards of rigor, and when you're in this mode of research, you want to minimize false positives. You don't want to say there is an effect or a difference between groups unless you have a high degree of credibility in that assertion. And the ubiquitous p-value that everybody loves to hate, they retain their value in a strictly confirmatory hypothesis testing sense. When one is looking for something unexpected, this is the context of discovery, and you're looking for information that wasn't predicted. You want to minimize false negatives in this point. You don't want to miss something that might be tantalizing. But it's not about presenting these probability values. It's about generating an explanation that itself should be tested. And pre-registration is designed to keep that distinction more clear. Unfortunately, we live in a world, a lot of the current incentives encourage us to present exploratory results using the statistical tools of confirmation, and it makes it look more surprising, it makes it look more publishable, but it comes at the expense of the credibility of the findings. So that's what we're trying to align the ideal incentives with the sort of the more statistical realities. Here are a couple of example workflows for how one can incorporate pre-registration into a typical research project. So here's a kind of an ideal case. We have a very strong prediction of what's going to happen. So you're going into it with a very confirmatory mindset. This doesn't always happen, but it's kind of the idealized scenario. Use that pre-registration, create it, timestamp it, then start the project by collecting the data, confirm using the plan that was in the pre-registration, then go ahead and dig around in the data set as much as you want. Look for those moderators that might explain some differences, label those as exploratory findings, and those can and should be used for the next round of data collection, next study. So this is kind of ideal, doesn't fit into everybody's workflow. Another way to do it is to start with a pre-registration that's very vague, saying that this is going to be a discovery process. That's what that first statement can be. Collect the data with that, and then randomly split the data into 2 equal halves, or sometimes 10% and 90% of the data, and dig through it as hold off some data set, keep it secret, but with the opened up portion of the data set, conduct the normal discovery, data dredging, look through the data set, look for possible explanations. And when something seems very tantalizing, something seems very promising, lock that in with a second pre-registration, and then test that with the data set that had been held off. This maintains the diagnostic value of the proposed tests and gives one the most credibility for this finding that is the last step. Conduct those confirmatory tests with that pre-registered plan. The OSF has a registries network to help one, to guide one through creating a pre-registration. It's required by law in clinical research, but it's applicable to basic science anytime one is conducting hypothesis testing work. And the OSF registry has examples from many different disciplines on how these registrations and how these pre-registered plans should look. But essentially, they can be useful for experimental research, observational studies. When you're using an existing data set, there are standards that are being developed for that, qualitative and mixed methods. And in the future, there'll be better standards for longitudinal and systematic reviews as well. When creating a pre-registration, you can go into the OSF registry network and add a new one. And that walks you through step by step the important considerations to include when creating a pre-registration for the first time. And it is the first time for many people who are, of course, not in clinical medicine. The last 2 points I'll make are about some of these broader policy initiatives that really seek to align ideals of how science should be done with more of the practical getting something published, for example. The registry report uses pre-registration, but incorporates it into the publishing workflow. So it's a publishing model where there's 2 stages of peer review. The first stage is essentially submitting a proposed study to the journal, where authors ask and reviewers, rather, authors assert, but reviewers evaluate, are the hypotheses well-founded? Are the proposed methods rigorous? Is it high-powered? And have the authors included quality control steps to make sure that it'll be a fair test? If the editors and reviewers agree that the answer to those questions are yes, then the study is given what's called in-principle acceptance, a promise to publish regardless of how the study turns out, as long as those quality control measures are demonstrated. The work is conducted, written up. The final quicker stage of peer review occurs where the authors are submitting the final study and reviewers are only evaluating whether or not the proposed study plan was conducted as specified ahead of time. Importantly, things like whether or not the hypotheses were supported, significant, or impactful, those things cannot matter for that second stage of peer review at this point. They have no bearing, as they should not. There's a comprehensive set of resources available for authors considering to submit a registry report. for reviewers who have been asked to review a study without the results. There are guidelines for how to do that. And also fact sheets for editors and template author and reviewer guidelines and instructions to help editors implement them. There's about 280 journals that use this format right now, and it's growing every day. And so you can see that list at on the COS website there. The very last thing I'll mention is a specific effort to address an obsession with novelty over credibility and transparency. Top Factor is an alternative way to evaluate journals based on their policies and the degree to which they encourage or require open science practices. So Top Factor rewards transparency. It aligns with these ideals of open science, and it's focused on what the journal does, not on the flashiness of the results or how many citations that it occurs. Top Factor is that database that I mentioned earlier that evaluates the journal policies based on the open science ideals that I mentioned earlier. Our data sets cited as original items are data made available by the journal or by the studies. Is the work pre-registered? Does the journal use the registered report format? These matter for reproducibility, and these matter for the core values of how science should be conducted. And so Top Factor is a way to clearly distinguish journals that are taking strong steps in this regard. And it's sortable by discipline, it's sortable by field, and it's sortable by the type of standard that you care most about. So I've focused a lot on pre-registration. If that's not something you care too much about, you can select the values that are most important and relevant to what you're looking at, perhaps the data standard. And I'm just about out of time, but I'll just say that there's room for improvement. There's 29 possible points one can receive through the Top Factor evaluation, and most journals aren't taking enough steps on these open science practices. They score closer to 0, 1, or 2, just taking some very basic steps on citation practices. I'll finish by emphasizing that the science advances through a cyclical process of creating ideas, testing them, updating our knowledge, and there are ways to incorporate open science into each of those steps so that we can better manage our own work, so that we can better present our findings, so that others who are looking at that can have more credibility in the results of our findings, no matter how they turn out, significant or not. With that, I will stop sharing my screen in just a minute, but I'll give you an opportunity to take a screenshot if you want to take a look at some of these links. The slides are available at that link, and all the resources that I provided are also available on this slide. So without further ado, I will stop and we can dive into some more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I love all of the examples that you were providing, and now everybody should have tools to include in their proposals to promote open science and open data. There are several questions that I'm going to translate to you, and I also have some. Let's start with Jorge Antunes. He's asking you, what is the main advantage against Git? Git is the repository for computer code. I don't know if you're aware of.
Yeah, and one thing I would say is don't drop a tool that one has that you're using and that you enjoy using. But we connect to Git because, and in fact, most of the folks who work at COS use Git on a regular basis, specifically for code development. Most of our work is put up on GitHub because it was built by and for the purpose of collaborative code development, software development. One thing that I didn't dive into is a number of add-ons and connections that we have. So sometimes a project will have Google Drive and Google Docs. Some team members will, in a different university, will be using Dropbox. The code development occurs on GitHub. And one thing that we encourage on OSF is to connect those all together with one DOI. And those can all be added on to an OSF project so that collaborators doing different parts of the project can all have a central resource where to post it. GitHub is the place to do collaborative software development and to look for version histories and changes there. But it's not a data repository, for example, or it's not a place to post a preprint or to register a study design. And so it has its place for that purpose, but it's specifically designed not to be a data repository, not to create persistent citable links for a hosted data set. And so it's one important good tool in, I would say, an open science toolbox.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We have more questions. Nuria Dadboch, she's asking, I guess that a lot of people has that in their minds. She's asking, are there controls to monitor that there is no plagiarism of the shared material? And following up her question, I would like to include another one. Before the people make public data with all of your tools, do you suggest to talk first with the IP office to be sure that they have everything protected, or?
Yeah, let me answer both of those questions. First, are there controls to monitor that the shared materials aren't plagiarized? Those are essentially handled in the same way that one would expect plagiarism in, of a journal article. So most of the time, the norms and expectations and consequences of plagiarism are handled through the academic environment and community and standards that are established usually at the journal level. But there are norms. For example, the organization COPE sets standards for what to do when plagiarism occurs. And that all applies to any, and that all should equally apply to any scholarly output, whether it's a shared questionnaire or survey instrument or a data set or pre-registration. All of these tools give you a citable, time-stamped evidence of when it was created. And that's your protection that can be presented through the existing imperfect channels of how plagiarism should be or is usually handled. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's ever a perfect system, but it is the same expectations exist for these open science practices as for traditional practices. And overall, open science practices give you the very specific evidence that one needs to present that as an ethical violation. One thing I didn't mention was pre-registration. Again, the same rationale applies. It's a time-stamped read-only version of your research plan at a given time. But if it's not appropriate to share that right now, those can be entered into an embargo for up to a maximum of 4 years. They do have to become public eventually. But if what you're working on is just not ready for public sharing at this time, those can be embargoed. And that's also why open science OSF projects are private by default, just to give you time to get things ready for sharing. The IP concern, we talk a lot with IP and offices and universities, and the same summary points basically apply. When you put something out there, as long as you can sort of demonstrate that what you're doing is, is under the normal course of academic work, and that you can sort of demonstrate that this is my work. Here's the DOI. Here's the identifier that shows when it was done. That gives you the same types of protections as the traditional academic outputs of publishing and so forth. So it's everything's protected in the same normal level, but these practices give you more evidence of what you did and when you did it.
Wonderful. I have a couple of questions from the speakers, the coming speakers. Eva Mendez from Portugal. He is saying the European Open Science Cloud initiative will offer researchers a virtual environment with open and seamless services for storage, management, analysis, and reuse of research data across borders and scientific disciplines by federating existing data infrastructures. Do you have plans to integrate partnership costs with EOSC? with the European Open Science?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are working with them on exactly that, the European Open Science Cloud. So there's, by its very name, the cloud is a is a diffuse item. And so our goal, is to be, I'm not sure what the right word would be, a particle of that cloud. And we do work closely with them, so we're aware of that ongoing effort, and want to promote and advocate for this type of connection. We already connect to, as was mentioned before, GitHub, Figshare, a lot of these repositories that are out there. One creates an integrated network when there are strong API connections between them. Application program interface is the way that cloud servers can simply programmatically talk to each other. And those automatic connections, once set up, they provide a seamless movement of information from one service to the next, or sometimes just a seamless movement of this overused term metadata, just pointing to like where the work was registered, if it was registered on OSF, or if it was registered in a clinical national registry, or if it was registered in there's the American Economics Association has a registry for social science research. Oftentimes it doesn't matter where the open science activity occurred, but as many folks know, sort of finding where it was or connecting where all the parts of the research occurred is a major technical challenge, but it's being solved by the philosophy that the European Open Science Cloud has of making sure that these things are connected, and that will help to address those FAIR principles and those FAIR ideals to make sure that all of these research outputs are preserved and connected, because we know that a traditional research article summarizes years of work, and the real interesting meat of that data, the real interesting work that went on is traditionally not preserved. And so OSF and the work of the European Open Science Cloud can really solve that problem.
Yes, Eva Mendez is supporting also having more partnership, and when we upload her like a speaker, I'm sure that she will have more to add. We have 2 last minutes for the last questions, so please, if you can keep it short. Salvador is asking how much cost your services, and another question is it possible to share, publish in your research reports and in papers?
Yeah, good questions. So our tools and services are free for individual researchers to use, and we have institutional pages or community pages that can be branded by a society, by a funder, by a publisher, and those we charge for, charge institutions. But for users, all of these tools are free, and whether or not we charge or it's free, it's all open source and reusable. And there are folks who have taken the code and used it for their own purposes. Can you publish, or is it?
Is it possible to share or publish a research report and at the same time a paper?
Yeah, there's, you can and should, I would advocate for quickly disseminating results, posting them online publicly, for example, via preprint, and then submitting to a journal after maybe some revisions have come through that channel. Each journal is a little bit different in what they expect to see, and Sherpa Romeo is one resource to help you figure out what the journal allows and encourages in terms of preprints. But most of the time, that's fine.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for your presentation. We have several questions, but we want to be respectful with the time from everybody, especially from Eva, who is connecting right now from Australia at 2 a.m. So thank you for being here today on Saturday. I'm sure that you will receive a lot of emails and follow-ups after this presentation. We have almost 200 people registered today and following your presentation. And now we are going to give the word to our next speaker. Let me share my screen. Whereas we are making her a panelist. So the next speaker is Eva Mendez. As you can see, Eva Mendez Rodriguez is an expert in metadata standards, where she has focused her research at the University Carlos III of Madrid. She defines herself as an open knowledge militant. She is one of the creators of the Hague Declaration on Knowledge Discovery in the Digital Age. In 2016, she was named Open Data Champion by Spark Europe. And from November 2017, she is the Deputy Vice President on Scientific Policy, Open Science. She has been the chair of the European Open Science Policy Platform and RDA ambassador for the interdisciplinary research. She is member of several boards and working groups related to open science. And it's a great pleasure to have Eva Mendez today with us. Thank you very much for joining us from Australia. Eva, you have your mute.
Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen.
Sure.
Probably I have to just put down yours.
I just did it.
Because I have, here we are. Okay, thank you very much for having me today here. It's a pleasure for me to talk to you about open science with the glasses of the European Commission, because it's the context that I have been working in the last 4 years in the European Open Science Policy Platform. And I would like to share with you some of the tricks and some of the visions that we have in the European perspective. I know that the attendance of this workshop is international, but also aware that they are mostly Spaniards and also some people from United States. So that would be very inspiring to know how it's going on in Europe. But first of all, let me share with you who am I and what is the things that the hats that I can be sharing with you today. But the biggest hat that I have on always is that I'm a researcher. I'm a researcher and a meta researcher because my meta research is engaging nowadays with the fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable principles to make fair data compliant with the principles of sharing the data in the big infrastructures, like it was commented in the previous presentation and previous question and answer, European Open Science Cloud. And also I'm involved in different projects like the IMFAHE and IMFAHE-UVa and some European networks that they just legitimize the input that the young European universities in Europe has in the open science landscape. But let me tell you what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to tell you where we are from the perspective of the final report that we were working in the European Open Science Policy Platform that was issued in the last Competitiveness Council in May last year, in the middle of the pandemic crisis. And also where we are and where we would like to be in the Horizon Europe landscape in terms of the new policies and the new initiatives that they are going to be in the new framework program. But first of all, let me remind you something. This is the guy that has changed the scientific communication. Actually, Tim Berners-Lee, the web, has changed the way we perform every single thing in our lives. The way that we communicate, the way that we make business, the way that we interact with people, but also the way that we should communicate science. The problem with science nowadays is that we keep doing science like in the 19th century. But the problem is that we have to move forward and to think that collectively we hold the power to change the way we communicate science. And also the COVID-19 situation has demonstrated this very efficiently. And let me tell you what is next for science in the terms of the new scientific communication that is actually in the context of the web. In the kind of the context of the web and the kind of the context of the new responsible research and innovation, which is what RRI stands for. The responsible research and innovation is the whole philosophical environment that legitimizes the way we have to do science. Because responsible research and innovation give us a new perspective of different elements that we have to consider. And one of these elements used to be open access, but nowadays, and now in the European research area that we are constructing right now in the European context, we are really dealing with the open science, not only open access, but further, which is open science that includes also all the research outcomes like data, but also software that it was commented in the previous conversation, and also other protocols and ways of communicating science where transparency is an integral component of this research and innovation process. Of course, always open science has been defined as an umbrella term, but I went farther and I say that it's not an umbrella, it is a mushroom. Because when I start to make my own umbrella, I realized that I need roots. You cannot hold open science in the nothing. You cannot hold open science like an umbrella under the rain. You need to have very good foundations. And the good foundations that you have in open science is the responsible research and innovation, which is the land, the soil, where open science grows. But also you need three key elements: research integrity, a new research ethical ecosystem that legitimize what you do in a reproducible way. Also, you need research infrastructures, and also you need a new reward system, which is the key issue that I will talk about afterwards. And under this big umbrella or big mushroom, or whatever we want to share, we have different elements like open access, open communication, text and data mining, open education, different elements that come in the whole concept of open science. But actually, the main thing is that transversally, we have the citizen science, which is the interaction of the citizens with the scientific process and with the scientific production of knowledge. Also, we have in a triangle representation of open science, we can just think about research values, that we all agree upon the research values. We all agree upon with the principles. We all agree upon with different things, but we have to agree upon with the practices and also with the incentives, because behind the open science practices should be incentives to reward the new career system, which is the things that we are currently working at the European level. And here you have also some key elements of open science, like open data, open material access, and open scholarship. We can just spend 3 hours discussing about, should we have to call it open science, open knowledge, and scholarship? I'm currently in Australia in a research stay, and in Australia they call it open scholarship and open research. So you include also sciences like social sciences and humanities, but also I'm a big defender of open science because I think it's a brand. It's like a code that we have to embrace, like if it was the brand for the car. The car is going to have their own speed, but we need a brand to sell it. And open science, in my opinion, is the choice of selling this new car. And this is the context that I told you about responsible research and innovation that has a code, charting and code for the researchers and the recruitment and the career assessment, and also something very, very close to the evaluation system, which is the institutional approach to the human resources strategy for research, which is kind of something that legitimizes the way that we approach open science in this context. But why open science? open science, it's kind of a way to legitimize that science belongs to the people who pays for that. If you are a European taxpayer, if you are an American taxpayer, you want to know what is going to happen with your taxes, money that is invested in the research process. So this is the kind of a very clear approach to the scientific result exposure to the guys that they really pay for that. This is a clear democratic approach to open science, but in the reality, it's not only about the conceptualism of the democratic or the transparency of the science. It's also about the rigor and the reproducibility and the way we do science in a legitimized way. That's why I think that open science just improve the visibility of the authors, the projects, also make research and the working capabilities of the researchers bigger, and also make the serendipity discovery by default. The serendipity is the art of discovering something that you need without looking for that. And also it speeds innovation, discovery, and also makes solutions for the societal, the sustainable development goals. And we can just think about that all these things, they cannot be behind paywalls. And we want also to have a transparent and reproducible science, improve collaboration, and think about long-term access to the outputs, and think about the efficiency of the research. And also something that is more important, and it has been mentioned in the previous talk, is the reproducibility of science, which is the focus of the last report that the European Commission have issued at the end of last year. Reproducibility of scientific results in the European Union. And we are also working now in the demonstration on the meta research about reproducibility of Horizon 2020 projects. But also the thing that put light on open science reality was the COVID-19 situation that just put on the focus that science should be completely available for everybody and should be collaborative. Because if we don't share the knowledge and if we don't share the outcomes, we cannot bear with the new vaccine, we cannot bear with new discoveries. So here we have a very, very key element to legitimize the concept and the practice of open science. Open science saves lives. So there is a very big statement from some of the open science militants like Paola Masuso and other key players in Europe, that they say that open science could save lives. And if we think about this landscape, I have to just give you a screenshot, just a big picture of what it was open science at the end of 2020. The European Open Science Policy Platform that I was chairing for the last 2 years, we have been running for 4 years. We were a group of 25 experts that we represented all the, well, not all the stakeholders, but some of the stakeholders in Europe, including research organizations, research funding organizations, libraries, academies, citizen science associations, and also all the players in the context of open innovation and open science. But in this context, we have some conditions and some conditions for actors, for the players, and some conditions for the data. We have some conditions for the data coming up from the legislation and the directives at the European level. For example, the GDPR in protection, or the new public sector information, which is the European Directive 1024, that includes fair data as a key issue for the public sector information and sharing data between different infrastructures and different disciplines and different kingdoms of data and the openness. And also we have different conditions from actors, like the Charter for European Researchers, that the new European Charter for Researchers, where we call the Code and Charter and Code, it's going to be reviewed because it's an old document and it has to be reviewed on the light of the new open science perspectives. And also in this big picture of what was going on until 2020, we have a bunch of recommendations. We have recommendations on the new infrastructures, the European Open Science Cloud. We have recommendations on the next generation metrics. We have recommendations on new indicators. We have recommendations on fair data. We have recommendations of the new ways of future of scholarly communication, and on and on and on. And also we made our own recommendations. But my question here was, who recommends the recommender? We can't just come up with a lot of recommendations, but what is the reality of all these recommendations? We have high-level expert groups for everything. We have high-level expectations for everything. But at the end of the day, what is open science in the practice? So that's why after our recommendations of the European Open Science Policy Platform, that we call something like the recommendation that they wrap up all the other recommendations, or we can just say that it's a meta recommendation about the 8 pillars of open science. We come up with this idea that we have 8 pillars, 8 key elements that the Commission puts on the board, but the big one is always the bottleneck of open science is the rewards and incentives. How do you reward open science? How do you reward, how do you promote, how do you improve, how do you push open science from the perspective of the career of the researchers? And also we have this recommendation in a transversal way from different stakeholders that were represented in the OSPP. But also at the end of the day, what I want to transform, what I wanted to transform is this recommendation and declaration mode to the PCI mode. What is a PCI? PCI is practical commitment for implementation. What a PCI means? A PCI means that it's a commitment that you can do in your own organization. That means you in the University of Ayadalis, what can you do for open science? We can't just make principles, recommendations. All the governments should have this and that and that. All the universities should sign DORA declaration. All the stakeholders should apply for this and that. No, excuse me. You, what can you do for open science? That's a PCI, a practical commitment for implementation. Something that you can do in a realistic way, something that you can do when you have jurisdiction. For example, nowadays, the Deputy Vice President for Research Policies in my university. So what I say is what I can do in my own university with all the elements, with the budget, with the power, with the support, with the no support, with the alliances, with the no alliances. What can I do in a realistic way for open science? This is the key element to apply in an actionable and in a practical way, the open science. And also we have to bear in mind that the motivators of wills for researcher, and that's why at the beginning I said to you, I will have my hat of a researcher because I'm a researcher myself. And the motivators of wills for researchers are 3: budget, money, law, and rankings. Unfortunately, this is what moves or what changed our state quo of research in the whole academic and research system in the public sector information research environment. But also there is another very important one, which is the seduction. This is one of my favorite slides that I always share with the people that I talk to, because of course you can just have like Plan S, for example, that probably all the audience have heard about this. Plan S is the practical commitment for implementation coming from the research performing or research funders, that they say, well, I have a budget, I have a bag of money. if you want this back of money, you have to apply for this openness. As a result, the impact of your research should be open. That's fine, completely. It's a practical commitment for implementation. But also we have another motivator of will, which is the law. When something is required, we apply for that. And I have a very easy example. For example, in Spain, the recommendation of publishing in open access the thesis and dissertations was forever. I defended my thesis in 2002, and it was a recommendation to put it in the public repository, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what it was really applied, this recommendation? What it was considered in the law? When the law says every single thesis dissertation should be publicly available. So this is what we are playing now at the European level. How can we move forward on a directive or something like it could be mandatory, not only a recommendation, mandatory input for the researchers to make the thing happen. And also rankings. That's, I know everybody hates rankings, but our life is based on rankings. When you say impact factor is a ranking. It's a stupid, in fact, it's a stupid, really outdated ranking, but we move for that because just put the publications in an order and you say you are in this quartile. If you are in this area, you are better than you are in this area. It's just a simple mechanism. It's a human perspective of ranking and putting things in order. But what will happen if instead of having all these motivators of will, we have also the seduction? The seduction means that we have to make open science very easy. We have to motivate people and we have to help people to apply for open science. And the best way to help them to do open science in the European level is just educated and motivated to do it in a proper way. You cannot blame people if they don't do something that they don't know how to do it. So that was the impact of the final report of the OSPP, that even if I didn't want it, my colleagues on the platform, they just agree upon to make new final recommendations. This is very funny because we were against of recommendations and we tried to make these practical commitments for implementation, but at the end of the day, we come up with more recommendations. And we have these 5 main issues, which is the academic career structure should be fostering outputs, practices, and behaviors to maximize the contributions to share research knowledge system. We are betting for a new research knowledge system, which is completely compliant with the approach of the web, with the approach of the collaborative system that implies the web. And also we want to have this research system as a reliable, transparent, and trustworthy system. Because if people don't have a trust in science, we cannot discover a vaccine, or we cannot say, just put me the vaccine. So the outcomes of the science should be trustworthy. And also we want to enable innovation and create a new culture that facilitates diversity, equity of opportunities. That means also including people in the third world. And for example, we want to move this forward from something that we call evidence-based policy and practice. This is what it comes meta research. And this is what I do on my own research, which is demonstrated that open science make better science, but based on evidence. So I have a very good example on this. For example, do you remember when at the beginning of the pandemic, people were just commenting in the newspapers, the communicators of the scientific communicators about the ibuprofen is good for the COVID, blah, blah, blah. And in 2 days, the whole academic and the whole research system just blamed that paper because they legitimize with the research evidence and with the collective knowledge that it wasn't true. It's what happened with the Wikipedia. If you try to change something in Wikipedia, that I say to my students, just change whatever you want, because in Wikipedia, everybody can put whatever they want. But in 2 minutes, you can have a bunch of people that they will argue your change. It's the same thing. If you put science in the open, the other researchers can blame you because you are not legitimizing what you said based on evidence. So this is a very, very good example to say that science in the open push changes much better. And the point is, where are we going from here? And where are we going from here? From the final report of the OSPP, the next destination, the next stop, guys, is Horizon Europe. Because at the end, people in Europe, we apply for funding, we need funding, we do research based on the funding, and the new framework for funding is Horizon Europe. And Horizon Europe really rely on the open science as a kind of a transversal approach. And that's why the regulation of the European Parliament that was published in the Council in last year, that's legitimized this really important approach of open science. And also in the Horizon Model Grant Agreement that was published at the end of February, also we push very much on all these new initiatives of open science. And open science is not just a program that focus on how to open science in this program, in this budget, or how to push open science in this methodology. No, it's a transversal thing in the whole program in Horizon Europe. And the other very, very important thing, sorry
to interrupt. I want to send you a kind reminder that we have 5 minutes left for the presentation.
Okay, good. Yes, I'm going on. So this is a very good approach on the Horizon Europe. The level of the people applying for funding, they have to demonstrate transversally that they have the commitment with open science. And this is what the commissioner, Maria Gabriel, said when she got nominated at the last December in 2019. And she was just kind of improving this approach of open science infrastructures, the European Open Science Cloud, etc. Here we have how we have evolved in the policies across the different framework programs. And here we have how the different member states have been evolving in these kind of approaches, because it's not only something that happened at a European level. If you don't embrace it in the context of your country, it's not going to happen. For example, in the case of Spain, because I know the audience is mainly Spaniards, that we have a review of the law of science that it was published in 2011, and now it's in a review process that is going to be including open science as a core strategy business. Of course, international and national policies in the global in different countries. But the point is that we don't need only to change the target year, because we keep changing the year, because could happen something like COVID that changes our own approach. And that is, excuse me, this is urgent now. It's not that you can postpone it for the next framework program. We have to do it right now. Now, let me just share with you something that happened last week. Well, it was announced in November, it was announced in December, but last week it was officially, well, not last week, the week before Easter, in the 24th of March, it was launched the Open Research Europe, what we call ORE, O-R-E, which is the new diamond platform for publishing in the open, just including all the researchers that apply for European funding, having a platform to publish in open access without any APCs, without any charge. And it's based on the philosophy of F1000, the Wellcome Trust system, on the philosophy of preprint, publishing preprints, and then go forward the legitimacy of the collaborative science, that with the peer review publishing is absolutely open peer review. And when you have that, you also put your paper at the end in the repository, because opening all open access, diamond open access, doesn't exclude that you have also to publish in the green and publishing in the open access. just let me give you a couple of words about open research data, which is the new business, the new big challenge, because the data, we are trying to build up data-driven research. And when we have a data-driven research, we have to really put the accent, put the strength on the data that we are just going to share. And this is what we call that we have to make data fair, findable, accessible, and reusable. But not only findable, accessible, and reusable, but also reproducible and reliable. Because if science is not reproducible and reliable, we cannot blame people that they don't believe on science. So we have this kind of a new challenge of making fair is what I say. It's not that I sleep on the R, it's that we need more R's, we need more principles, and we are working on this in different ways. So here you have the FAIR principles that everybody talks about, FAIR principles in a very light way, but it's very, very difficult. I'm working now in 2 European projects, FAIR is Fair and Fair for Health, and we are trying to define the FAIR principles in practice and make a real transparency and a real transversal approach on this. This is what you have to do, the data management plan, but not only data management plan, but output management plan is what we recommend in the Open Science Policy Platform recommendations. Go further, not only with the data, but also with the software, protocols, methodologies, etc. And here we have a definition of the federated approach to the European Open Science Cloud, which is a big infrastructure that tries to put together all the research data in Europe, which is not very easy, because we have a very long tail of science. It's not only that we can define 3 layers of services, governance, and data, we also need to have a transversal layer that put together different domains and just come to the long tail of science that we can approach it in a very, very comprehensive way. What are the urgent challenges that we have on board? Is the way that we communicate science. We need something more than papers. Paper is completely outdated, and papers are completely in the business of the big publishers, that they haven't made an evolution further after the web. We need to change the way we evaluate science further again than the journal impact factor. And we need to a different way to give credit for this, further than the copyright, which is also again an outdated legislation. Are you ready for changing the way that we evaluate research? Because it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult because we have different domains, different practices, and different issues. And also, just my last slide, I just discovered that open science in the new target, which is 2030, it was 2020, but the 2020 just overcame on the 2020 just passed, and also with the big COVID thing, and it was very, very challenging target. Now we put a target forward, and in this target we have now what I call the RR mode. And thank you, David, because you give me another RR, which is the registered report, because I say that the RR mode means responsible research and innovation, rights and retention strategy, which is now a strategy that comes out of the coalition S for the publications, but it just makes sense with the challenge that I mentioned before, that we need another way to legitimize the copyright. And also the key issue is to come up with responsible research assessment, which is a new way to make career development and a new way to measure science. Because in the COVID-19 times, science is not like a mushroom. Science is like a parachute. If it is not open, it's not going to help you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Mendez. So there are several questions here. It was really interesting, your talk. Thank you. And it's even more challenging considering that you are in Australia so late. So thank you very much. David Sanchez is mentioning most large-scale research in Europe is collaborative. For instance, we have the H2020. Consortia are comprised of scientific and industrial partners, the latter of which are reluctant to accepting FAIR principles. How would you suggest to cope with this when developing dissemination and data management plans based on open science? So it talks a little bit about it.
That's a very good question. It's something that I envision, and I'm just struggling on my own policy in my university, University of Ayadalis, how we can cope with innovation and with open science. The thing is that it's pretty easy, and it happened to be in the kingdom of the open science in health research. For example, I'm working in FAIR for Health project, which is working with clinical data and applying FAIR principles of clinical data. But also there is another project that is called FAIR Plus that includes also industry. And that's very easy. If you are using public money, you have to apply public rules. If you can use your own money for doing research, if you are a pharma, if you are a very pharmacological, very big chemist, industry, or you are just having your own company, do whatever you want. But if you are just making the research for the public good, you have to do it in the open. And actually, this is one of the challenges that I mentioned at the end of my slides. That is, how can intellectual property and industrial property to the society, which is the main issue of science, how they can cope with the basic science, and how we can go all together to push forward in a very harmonized system to make things happen. So the COVID-19 then has millions of examples of collaborative science, and actually now there is a discussion, and also the Commission. There is one unit in the Research and Innovation Directive General in the European Commission that is dealing with the transformative approaches to IPR, and they just come up with a declaration of the COVID-19. So perhaps we can think about, in these kind of crucial situations, we can get rid of the patents. We can get rid of the individual good, individual profit for the common profit and the common good. So this is a question of balance.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Related to the PCIs, I have these questions. What are your recommendations to the university? Should they listen their investigators? What is realistic for them to achieve them? Or should the university decide what are the PCIs that they want to install and then just pass it to their investigators?
This is another very good question, because it's something that is, well, the questions that they are in the chat is the questions that they are on the table nowadays. This is a question that I am addressing now in an institutional level in my own institution, because I think at the end, open science should be an approach top-down and bottom-up. For example, the top-down approach is the common mandate of open access, of open science, but also you need to have a background. You have to have a critical mass of people that we can call them the champions. We can call them, I call them in my university, the full open science ambassadors, that they are the people that they practice open science, and they demonstrate that practicing this is just compliant with the mandate. Because if you do the top-down initiative, this is what you have to do, it's not going to work. Because at the end, there is no monitoring system. It has to be, again, as I said in my favorite slide, by seduction. If you don't convince people based on the evidence that if you do science in the open, you are using the parachute, because science is going to be open and will help you. And also you can demonstrate that your science, your research, your results are more visible, transparent, etc. But also these top-down and bottom-up, they have to be completely, you know, with a bow of the reward system. So this is the key factor.
That's a good advice. We are running out of time, so I would like to ask you the last question. Although we have a couple more. If you want, you can do it through the Q&A and answer them directly. So Ana Laura Lopez is mentioning, thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to know how to make possible to take this to the international level and not to keep it at the European context. Do you think if it's important and reachable? Thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we are working now. The last 16 and 18 of March, we have a meeting, what is called now the stakeholders platform. It's not a European Open Science Policy platform. It's just kind of a broader perspective of Open Science Stakeholder Forum. And we come up with exactly this idea. It's not only about, of course, they are different levels. European Commission has a lot of push to open science because they are the funders. They are not only the policymakers, they are the funders. And this is what apply the golden rule that I say that who has the goal puts the rule. And at the end, this is very effective because it's something like, you know, you can't just push the people over. But if open science is not an international approach, it's not going to work because I want my students to apply for a Fulbright, for example, to go to the US. And if they don't have the same criteria to be evaluated, it's not going to work. It's not only a European initiative, it's also a European initiative, member state, and also an international, a global thing. In the US, we are in contact with the new table of discussion about these topics that is called like that. Table of Open Science or something like that. And also we are very much in touch with the representatives of the member states and the commissions of open science at national levels, and also with the funding of the whole thing of the UNESCO. You know that UNESCO has been having proposed the principles of the draft at the end of the European summer. And they are going to have a very, very good push of these best practices of open science for the member states of the UNESCO members at the end of November. So I think that it will be a kind of big umbrella coverage on the open science principles. It has to be global. If it is not global, it's not going to work. It's my particular personal endeavor in 2021.
Definitely. We have to have the same high standards, everybody. Thank you very much again, Professor Mendez, for your participation and for sharing so many interesting data and information with us. So now I'm going to pass to the other speaker and move forward. Here we go. So it's my great pleasure to introduce João Moreira. João Moreira is the head of scientific information at the Foundation for Science and Technology in Portugal, CCM. João has been 15 years of experience managing infrastructures, advanced services, and scientific content aimed for the national research and education community. Currently, he is the head of scientific information of FCCM, a unit of the Foundation for Science and Technology in Portugal. This area comprises the online library of knowledge, the Portuguese open access scientific repository, and the Portuguese current research information system manager. He is member of several committees and working groups, including the National Open Science Policy Working Group, Open Air Advisory Board, or the DP Space Steering Committee, among others. Thank you very much, João, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure having you. I'm going to stop sharing my computer so you can share your presentation.
Okay, I think you can see it. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a big pleasure to be here and also to have attended the previous speakers. So I would like to talk about open science from a funder perspective. And the funder I work for is the Foundation for Science and Technology, which is the biggest and almost the only funder in Portugal, and funds all the areas of science and research. It is publicly funded, and it's under the responsibility of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Higher Education. We have no less ambition than to be a global reference for research and innovation, and to generate and to ensure that the knowledge generated underpins social and economic development. So FCT supports all the spectrum of research. We have several funding instruments that are presented in this slide, like people, projects, institutions, etc. And I work for, my work is, as you have described, is not related to funding. We have nothing to do with funding. We are a separate unit that provides services and infrastructures for the education and research community. And so our pillars, our main activities are represented in this slide. So we handle connectivity, we connect to the GIA network. We provide collaboration tools. For instance, at this stage, the Zoom or the web conference service that is being provided to the education communities is provided by us. We have the knowledge area, which I will talk into more detail next, supercomputing facilities, and also security, which is common and transversal to all the areas of knowledge. So we try to act and to have an holistic approach to open science, what I call the 360 degrees approach. And today I've learned, I know some that we still have to work some areas, but this is kind of another representation of the pyramid that David Meller presented in the beginning, because he was mentioned policy, incentives, and so forth. And this is kind of a different representations. And the pillars we have is the policies and regulations, the golden rule, meaning using Eva words, we have the funding, so we can choose the conditions to provide that funding to the funding instruments. Then we have services and infrastructures to make the open science practice possible, and also training and dissemination. So starting by the policies and recommendations, we have a national law that was issued in 2019, and Article 9 encourages the adoption of open access practices and processes for the creation, sharing and use of scientific knowledge by R&D institutions in accordance with the principles that underpin the strategies of open science and rights to science. In terms of FCT, we have an open access policy since 2014. It is aligned with the previous European Commission open access policy, but it will be reviewed, and I will let you know why in a minute. We also issued in 2014 recommendations on management and sharing of data and the results arising from FCT funding research. And we have been, over the last year, drafting the policy for research data, which has been recently approved by the FCT board, and we are now handling implementation issues. With regards to evaluation, we try to provide guidelines so that evaluation respects the principles and practice of open science as well. So this is the reason why we will have to change our open access policy, because FCT joined Plan S in early 2021. And for those who are not completely familiar with Plan S, it has several principles, being probably the most important ones, to ensure that all the publications resulted from funded research must be published in open access journals or platforms, or made immediately available through open access repositories without embargo. And there can be three different ways to address these requirements. The work can be published in open access journals or platforms, in institutional repositories with zero embargo, and or with transformative agreements, and I will talk about this in a minute as well. So the hybrid journals are not covered by Plan S. So with regards to funding, the challenge is to enforce the policies and regulations into these funding instruments. And we have talked a bit about change management, and this is really difficult because the funding agencies, at least my own, is a big institution, and the processes and the information systems and people, they are used to do things in a way. So when we talk about open access and open science, that means more work for them, and it is hard. It takes time, of course, to convince them of open science. And then it is not something that you do a policy and you go away. No, there's a profound impact on the operations of the funding agency. You have to change the grant documentation. You have to change the model grant agreement. You have to verify the expenses, and if the policy is being delivered. You have to change the application guides, the evaluation guides, the processes, the systems, and you should have a monitoring system so that if beneficiaries don't comply, you can address them and ask them to comply. So in terms of open science services, they are presented in this slide. The first three relate to open access, and they are the three roots of the Plan S. The transformative agreements, that means that is a change from pay to read to pay to publish, and you have to negotiate with all the publishers their acceptance to stop receiving money only for reading, but also to publish articles. And this is very complex. We have started, we are in the negotiation stage this year, so it's very hard. The second one is related to OA journals, and I will talk into more detail on this. And the third is related to institutional repositories. And then we have research data and open educational resources. We have also initiatives on these fields, and I will talk later on. So I don't have time, and I won't go into much detail. You can see the slides later, but this is the national consortia, and again, as I've said, the open science application or as Eva said, the practical commitment implication is the Plan S. So, we are now addressing the transformative agreements. Then we also have a very ambitious project for OA journals infrastructure, which is the PubIn initiative, where not only we want to make available open access journals infrastructures, but also to make them interoperable and make them open science friendly, and also to ensure that the contents being deposited are preserved. Then we have the National Open Access Initiative, and this initiative started in 2008, and we have a portfolio of services. And by many years ago, no one had the excuse not to deposit something, because this service is national and provides a repository for each and every single institution that wants to comply. And thanks to this, then it became the instrument to enforce the law of legal deposit of theses and dissertations. And we almost near 90% compliance at this stage. So 90% of theses and dissertations are deposited in this repository network. And also this project is also the way to comply with the open access FCT policy. So with relates to research data management, this is the last, one of the latest services we are working on. We started 2020, and we are working on 4 pillars: the governance and policies, infrastructures, training, and alignment. And the main goal that we have here is to, in terms of services, to provide data management plan services, and also long-tail repository services for research data. We also had a pilot last year, and where we have already applied the MPs to some small funding, and it was very successful. So we are very happy, and hopefully with this approval of the research data policy, we'll be able to move forward with the bigger funding instruments. So this is the massive online open course system, and it's interesting because we have a course that is dedicated to research data management. Like mostly in every country, there is scarcity of human resources, and this kind of tools is very important to provide knowledge at a low cost. In terms of infrastructures, it is also an area where we are strong, because this is in the foundations of our unit. And this is a bit complex slide, but I want to show you that with regards to e-infras, we work on the 3 triads: computing, data, and the network. And we make a big effort to align our e-infras with the international initiatives in all the 3 areas. And this also ties with the European Open Science Cloud. This is a complex slide, but the thing is that there is a way to connect e-infras into the EOSC, and also the roadmap infrastructures into the EOSC as well. So that's what we will try to do in our strategy. Also very important is that we are a small country, small funding agency, try not to reinvent nothing. And we are always learning from other stakeholders about the work that we are doing and following the best practices they recommend. And the last is training and dissemination, and we have been very active in this aspect because we have several events, conferences, the massive online courses that I mentioned, so that people can create awareness and can learn how to do things and can commit to open science. So the last thing is I think this was addressed previously because and the reasons why I call it the Lego science, where you build new science from existence science, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is about the burden that research information management can have, and we also have a program which is top-down and bottom-up. We have a political initiative called More Science, Less Bureaucracy, and we have a technical project that is called PTCRIS and aims to ensure the creation and sustained development of a regulatory framework and infrastructures to implement an integrated national information ecosystem to support the management of scientific activity. And then again, it's another representation of the pyramid we have seen also in the first presentation. And I think that's it. I think I'm good on time, but let's see what questions you have for me.
Yes, indeed you were. Thank you very much for your time, for your presentation, and for giving us a broad overview of how you are operating in Portugal. We have a lot of people connected from Portugal. I'm sure that is very interesting for them. Whereas we receive questions in our Q&A application, I have a question for you. It's very interesting, the courses that you are providing about research data management more these days, right? Where they want to implement all of this in the different institutions. Is this open to any person in any country of the world, or is it just for Portuguese people?
I think it's open to every researcher. I would have to check because the platform is general purpose. For you to understand, there's also a wine tasting course on the platform, so it's general purpose. And this course was produced by the team of Mini University, and we want to renew the course this year because things are changing and to update the course, but I think it's open to the other people, yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I hope that more people now that they have the information are engaged of this course because it looks very interesting. Daniel Morinigo is asking, is saying very nice talk, you know him. How difficult do you think it will be for researchers to adapt to the open science framework? Is this question?
In my opinion, this is. I think Eva Mendez talked a bit about it. It requires a collective will. It requires a will to change, but at the end, there are some. There are the incentives, the golden rule, but I think the most what Eva Mendez is the preferred way she talked about. I don't recall now, which is kindly convincing someone that's the Seducing, yeah, yes, seducing. And I truly believe on that, because if you ask me, I have a research project. I want to do test some hypotheses. And if you ask me, do you want to start from scratch? Do you want to purchase machines? Do you want to collect your data? Do you want to build your algorithms? Do you want to build your protocols? Or do you want to go to a website, for instance, like the IOSC, do a few clicks, provision the machines, provision the data, the artificial intelligence algorithm, and then in 1/10 of the period you have the results. I think this is seduction, but we have to bear in mind that the people that is guiding doctorates is not used to do this. So or some of them are not used to do this, and it requires a cultural change. One of the successful practices are again the practical commitment implementation. I don't know, probably is in the Eva is mentioning we have one of these recommendations is to have a course for PhD students in early stages of their PhD and teaching the best practices of open science and research.
Wonderful. Okay, we don't have more questions for you. So now we are going to have a small break. It's 12:07 in Boston, Eastern Time. We are going to come back at 12:45 Eastern Time, 9:45 a.m. in California, 6:45 p.m. in Madrid, and 5:45 p.m. in Portugal. And just as a brief reminder, we are having speakers connected from 3 different continents in the world, 5 different panels. We have almost 200 participants who are connected from 4 continents in the world. Thank you very much for all of your time, for sharing all of your knowledge with us. And we will see you in 45 minutes. Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to restart with this open mini symposium. I can see Professor Eisen is connected. Thank you very much for connecting, Professor Eisen. I want to send a quick reminder that we are almost 200 people connected, speakers from 3 different continents in the world. There are participants from 4 different continents of the world, multiple countries. And the second part of this Open Science and Free Global Mini Symposium has the goal to remind us that science is funded, the majority of the science is funded with taxes from citizens. So it's imperative, it's our obligation to communicate properly to the society the impact of our research and why it's important these days to do research. So we are going to start first with Professor Michael Eisen. He is the co-founder of, Professor Eisen is a professor of genetics, genomics, and development in the molecular and cell biology department, and a professor of integrative biology at the University of Berkeley in California. He is leading advocate of open science scientific publishing and is the co-founder of the Public Library of Science Plus journal. Most probably everybody is aware of this very famous journal. A non-profit open access science, technology, and medicine publisher with a library of open access journals and other scientific literature under an open content license. He's also the editor-in-chief of the peer-reviewed open access scientific journal, eLife. Thank you very much for connecting today from California, which is very early right now over there. The floor is yours, Professor Eisen.
Thank you very much. Switch to my screen. You can see?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. So thanks for organizing this and thanks for having me. I'm going to give you kind of a whirlwind tour through my thoughts about a little bit of history, a little bit of a future view of sort of the publishing landscape in science and what we've tried to change and what I think we still need to change. So I want to start.
One question, can we ask you to doing a presentation mode? Because we can see all of the order of slides right now. So
really? I don't see that, so I don't know how you see it. So,
okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. I was doing that so I could see the clock as I went, but I'll use some other means to do it. As many of you will be vaguely aware of the early history of the internet. The internet was actually invented to help scientists communicate. So, you know, the early nodes of the internet were all at research universities in the United States or at research companies in the United States, and it was developed with the explicit purpose of making it easier for them to communicate, you know, the results of the research that they were doing. In this case, it was primarily research for the government and for the Defense Department, but the basic principle of organizing people together and allowing them to share information electronically was literally designed, and the technology was invented to facilitate the communication among scientists. And, you know, zoom forward now 50 years, and I think we all know that the internet has, you know, fundamentally transformed essentially everything we do in our lives. I like to, I don't know if you're hearing the audio in here. I'll just show you my little, I like to have a little local flavor here since this is in Spain. This is the one and probably only time that the United States ever beat Spain in football. For me, this is like the most amazing thing that I have in my pocket, this little device that can connect to the internet and watch sporting events from all over the world. And I don't have to tell everybody that the internet has, you know, just transformed nearly everything that we touch in our day-to-day lives, except for science communication, right? Like, so it was invented to make science communication work better. And then all these things have happened, but science communication remains very, very similar to what it was like before the internet was invented. Papers look the same. They actually don't look all that different than what they looked like before the internet came along. They don't even look all that different between what they looked like when science journals were first invented in the 17th century. And you know, I always like to make the point that Francis Bacon, who is often credited with having invented the idea of the science journal, or at least been around when the science journal was invented, if he came to the modern world, he would find literally everything that we do alien and weird and fascinating, but he would find comfort in science journals because science journals look shockingly similar to what they looked like in his era. Okay, so why is this a problem? It's a problem because almost anywhere you look in science publishing, you see that the system is not achieving its goals of helping science work better. Okay, so everything is wrong with it. First of all, the problem that open access tries to solve is that it's greatly restricted. Only a tiny fraction of the world's population has access to the scientific and medical literature that is actually online. People have internet connections. The majority of the world have internet connections, but only a tiny fraction of those people have access to what I would argue is one of humanity's greatest creations, which is our scientific and medical literature. And this isn't just members of the public who you might think don't actually need or benefit from this, although I think they do. This is researchers, teachers, healthcare workers, journalists, people who actually care about, want to, and can benefit directly from accessing the scientific literature cannot get access to it. That is, however, only one of the many things that's wrong with it today. It is incredibly slow. I think, as any scientist knows, that you know, a typical paper now takes about 9 months to go from submission to publication, and in many cases, and still the majority of cases, that paper isn't available to the public or even to other researchers during this time. These delays slow science. Like if you believe that science helps the world in myriad ways, you have to believe that delays in publishing slow the application of science to the public. I like to show this little rover too, because you know, if you think about what we can do in 9 months, we can actually launch a robot up into space, send it between planets, you know, millions and millions and millions of miles away, and have it land on the surface of another planet and start sending us pictures back in the same amount of time it takes us to publish a paper on Earth. It's completely ridiculous. It is also true that if we printed up all of the science papers that we publish in a given year and put them on that rocket with the robot, sent the papers to Mars, and had the robot start sending pictures of those papers back to us in order to make them available, this would actually not only be faster than publishing them in science journals, it would actually be cheaper. It would cost less money to launch every paper to Mars and send it back as a photograph than it does to put them through the current publication system. And that slowness kills. You know, every scientific advance that has contributed to saving lives has been delayed by slowness in publication. And therefore, you have to believe that this system actually leads to deaths, and that is unacceptable. Okay, it's, as I pointed out, incredibly static and stale. I mean, the biggest innovation in science publishing in 350 years has been color figures. And that really is not, is not a triumph for us. It's also incredibly convoluted. There's 50,000 journals. Authors send their paper to them. They bounce around from journal to journal. So, you know, readers can access some of them and not others. And the way we pay for it is really Byzantine, with money going from funding agencies to universities to libraries and then to journals via subscriptions and other kinds of things. It makes absolutely no sense. It's one of the worst cobbled together systems that we have on the planet. Right. And as I mentioned before, it's insanely expensive. We spend something like $5,000 a paper across science, cumulatively about $10 billion a year on a publishing system that doesn't even work particularly well, right? It's ineffective. As you know, peer review as we do it today doesn't solve the problem it's meant to solve, which is to tell us what science is and isn't reliable or isn't important. It's incapable of doing that in a perfect way. It's not even designed to do that well, and it's really biased, right? The system is at many levels, at the levels of author identity, where they're from, fields, and things like that. The system actually makes it more difficult for many people to publish the work than it should. Okay, and finally, it's incredibly distorting. The whole infrastructure of science is designed, this whole of science publishing results in us idolizing certain journals and papers, and therefore the science that they publish, way more than they deserve. And that distorts the way that we think about the results of science, distorts the way that we do science. Okay, so I would say, like, given all those failures of science communication, we have completely failed the internet. The internet, which was designed to help us as scientists communicate better, we have barely taken advantage of it at all. Okay, and if you want to put that, distill that down to a single paragraph, like basically we pay publishers $10 billion a year to oversee a process that ends up publishing material the publishers played no role in creating. This was created by scientists and created and funded largely by the public, right? Scientists did all the critical work, both in terms of writing the papers, but also doing the peer review and in most cases, the editing of the manuscripts. And in exchange, we get slow, incomplete access to a centuries-old product that isn't particularly reliable and which distorts who gets to have science careers, how those careers are built, and it also shapes science in ways that are actually destructive to what we are trying to accomplish. Okay, so why haven't we fixed that? Like, what is wrong with us as a scientific establishment that we have a system that is so problematic and that we haven't fixed, right? I mean, those of you who are in physics or in fields allied with physics, they fixed many of these problems a long time ago. Before the modern internet was born, they were already sharing papers freely with each other via a preprint server that exists to this day, although its name has changed for obvious reasons. And so, what is wrong with the biomedical research community, and indeed chemistry and many other fields of science, that we've been unable to solve these problems in the same way that physicists have. Okay, so right, so the modern internet, born in 1996, right? Lots of, a long time ago for many of you probably weren't even born then. It was, for me, it was an important moment because it was when I started to do my postdoc, and it's also when I started to get involved in trying to fix science publishing. And I'm not going to go through my own personal history with this, except to say that we realized, more or less, as soon as science journals started to go online, which was really around 1996, that the availability of electronic copies of things that used to only be available in print meant that we could use the information in different ways, and we could make it more widely available than had ever been possible before. And so we, and by we, I mean me and Pat Brown, who was my postdoc advisor and has been my collaborator in all the things that I've done in publishing since, we realized that we were not taking advantage of this technology in the right way. And so our first inspiration was to say, well, if the physicists solved it with a preprint server, why don't we just do that writ large? So again, this is kind of a forgotten moment in the history of publishing. So I want to focus on it. In 1999, so very soon after sort of the internet came along and journals started to go online, the NIH, led at the time by Harold Varmus, put forward a really aggressive proposal to fix science publishing. And this is a system called eBiomed that you don't know about, most of you don't know about because it was ultimately killed, but it was a very far-reaching proposal that would have basically created a system that had very simple, instantaneous access to the entire corpus of published biomedical research literature, allowing people not only to get access to it for free, but to use it in whatever way they saw possible. So it was really amazing. The eBiomed, it wasn't perfect, but it had all the features we might want in a forward-looking publishing system. It put the decision of when a paper should be shared in the hands of authors instead of publishers. It provided free, immediate access to the scientific literature to anyone, anywhere with an internet connection. It proposed a process of streamlined peer review where papers were posted in eBiomed and then they were peer reviewed and they didn't bounce around from journal to journal and so forth. And critically, it recognized the important role that funders have in deciding how the research that they fund should be shared. Okay, in essence, it replaced this system that we had at the time and sadly still have today with a very simple system where authors put their papers in eBiomed, readers can get access to anything. The NIH and other funders just fund the system directly instead of by making people pay to access articles or pay to publish them, and it would have layered peer review on top of it. So why, when there was this simple system proposed and by as powerful an organization as the NIH, didn't it come into play? Well, it didn't come into existence because publishers killed it. And not just the publishers we like to complain about Elsevier and Wiley and the big commercial publishers, but actually the big opponents of this system were the not-for-profit publishers that were run by scientific societies. They hated this policy because it would have taken away their revenue streams, and they had good access to politicians in the United States, at least. And so they lobbied to have this system killed, and they succeeded. The system was killed. Congress basically said we won't fund it, and we were stuck with having this idea out there, but no actual implementation of it. So what happened? That's where, at least in my part of the universe, open access was born. Right? We saw the failure of reform via government action as a kind of call for us to try to reform it by individual action. And so eBiomed morphed into what you probably do know now, which is PubMed Central, which is a place where journals could post their content if they wanted to, but neither the journals nor scientists were obliged to do so. And we felt quite strongly that what science needed was journals that by design and from their inception put their content in PubMed Central, made everything that they published freely available, and that we would win in the marketplace where we had failed in the sort of halls of politics. And the fundamental principle of open access publishing and what undergirded PLOS was that rather than covering the cost of publishing via subscriptions, right? The problem with subscriptions is you have to have a paywall to prevent freeloaders. If you have a subscription system, but people can get access to the content for free, nobody's going to subscribe. At least that was the principle. That it would be better, that open access posits that it'd be better for science to pay those costs up front and allow the works to be made freely available to all. Okay. And the analogy we like to think of is the analogy of a midwife or an obstetrician delivering a baby, right? And publishers are a lot like this. They didn't really create the baby, they didn't create the paper, but they play some role in kind of bringing it to life, to birthing a scientific manuscript. But so an obstetrician could have a business model like science publishers, where they say, well, we didn't make the baby, we didn't deliver the baby, we didn't gestate the baby, we were just there to help out when the baby was delivered. But in exchange for that, we're going to take ownership of the baby and we're going to lease it back to the parents on an annual basis that in order to regain access to this child that they created. Now, the parents would feel under incredible obligation. They'd have to pay for it because they need access to their own child. And the obstetrician could charge basically whatever they wanted because they have the upper hand. But nobody in their right mind would create a system like that for obstetricians. So why do we allow it to exist for science publishing? Open access changes that. It basically says, we do something, we help out the process by organizing peer review and formatting manuscripts. We deserve to be paid for that, but we should only be paid for the service. We shouldn't get ownership of the content. And that's the kind of fundamental principle of open access. It's easy to explain, harder to make happen. It's been a long slog. Open access is growing. The number of articles that are published in some flavor of open access journal, and here I include anything that makes the content freely available, no matter what its business model, that has grown. It's approaching 50% nowadays. But it really hasn't had the transformative effect on the way that the science publishing system works that we had hoped. And the reason for that, I think, is that, right, so here's just an example, right? Like we did not imagine when we started PLOS that the destination we would arrive at was that Nature would be charging people over $10,000 a paper to publish them in their journals. We had hoped and we believed that the creation of open access and its sweeping across publishing would fundamentally alter science publishing in ways that would solve all those other problems that I talked about at the beginning, not just the economics. And it turns out in the end, it didn't even really solve the economics. $10,000 to publish a paper is as absurd and inaccessible as being forced to pay to access the paper. So in many ways, this experiment has not really succeeded. And I think that the reason is that, we made a really fundamental mistake at the beginning of this process. I mean, it's an understandable mistake and it was well meant, but I think that looking back, there was a big missed kind of opportunity or missed target in our early processing. Okay, right. We tried to fix a problem. It's a huge problem. It's a real problem. It's a problem that exists today. And that is the problem of getting access to the scientific literature. We tried to fix this problem by targeting the economics of science publishing. But we didn't really fix the problem that allows this system to perpetuate. And the core problem that we have is not how we fund journals, right? That is now clear. That it is possible to keep everything else about the science publishing system intact, but change the way it's funded. And that's kind of where we're at today. The problem isn't the economics. The problem is the existence of journals in the first place. right? So we thought that if we just changed the way that journals made their money, we turned them into service organizations that were paid not to control access to content, but to actually provide a service to the scientific community, that would lead to a big change in how publishing worked, but it didn't, okay? It turns out that alone is not enough to break our addiction to journals. Journals are much more of a powerful psychological and practical force in science than we had originally credited them with. And they turn out to be robust to changes in their economics. So I would argue that, in fact, if you look back at all those things that I ticked off at the beginning as problems in science publishing, that they all stem from our reliance as a community on journals, and in particular journal titles, as how we measure the value of works of science, and by implication, the scientists who carried that work out. So, right, so it is the lesson of the last 20 years for us that the status of journal brand as the currency of careers in science has made it virtually impossible to change the things that need to be changed about the publishing system. It's why everything is static. It's why everything is slow. It's why everything is expensive, right? Individual scientists, I meet very, very few scientists who ever argue that the things I'm talking about are bad ideas, right? Everybody thinks we should have science freely available. Everybody thinks that the system of peer review is archaic and doesn't really work. Everybody appreciates that the system is broken in fundamental ways, but as practicing scientists who have to advance their careers by publishing in journals, they do not feel empowered to make different choices in how they publish. Now, I don't think they're right in their mentality. I think that they could change the way that they publish and not ruin their careers, but people don't think that. They don't agree with me. And so the journals themselves are the problem we're having today, right? And that fact is what basically empowers publishers to not change what they do and to charge extortionist prices. I always like this figure, right? When you think about countries that companies that are incredibly profitable, the things that people tend to think about are like Apple and Google. But Apple and Google would be jealous of Springer and Elsevier and other scholarly publishers in terms of their profit margins, right? These publishers, and I should include not-for-profits here as well, because their profit margins are the same. This is a deeply kind of almost extortionist industry that takes advantage of its hold over science careers to engage in a really messed up economic system. Okay, so if the existence of journals makes it impossible to improve science publishing, do we actually need journals at all, right? The clear implication is we have to get rid of journals. So how do we do that, right? I love this quote from this blogger named Clay Shirky, right? Publishing, we tend to think about publishing still in the mode that existed before the internet, which was that publishing is a process where papers have to go through this thing where they get turned into some kind of new document, and then they get some formal stamp that says, we are published, this is it. That is not publishing in the internet, right? As Shirky pointed out, that is not a job, it's not a system. Publishing on the internet is a button. It's a button that says publish, and when you press it, you have published your work, because that is what makes work freely available, okay? We have finally entered the age of the publishing button in biomedical research because of the rise of bioRxiv. So bioRxiv it took 30 years almost to follow on the example of the physicists and move to a world where authors can just share their work freely and openly whenever they want to via the internet. But finally we caught up by the creation and rise of bioRxiv, which is the biologist's version of the preprint server that physicists started back in 1992. So bioRxiv is growing very, very rapidly. It's getting new papers and revised papers. It's gotten, I don't have the data for 2020, but it grew quite extensively as everybody started to just write papers during the COVID lockouts of their labs. And so now that we have bioRxiv to handle publishing, what do we need journals for, right? Do we actually need them at all? And the answer that if you say, well, we're going to get rid of journals, that comes up on everybody's lips is, okay, fine, we don't need journals to publish everything. We can post it in bioRxiv, but we need peer review. We need somebody to handle peer review. Okay, so I'm going to argue in the last 5 minutes here that we don't even need journals to do peer review, right? Journals are the system we've created to do peer review. They have, arguably served us well for the duration of their existence. But if you were going to start a system from scratch today without any of the baggage that comes along with our publishing history, and you said, well, would you create, if you have a system where authors can just publish their work, would you layer on top of it 50,000 journals to like take all those papers out of and put them into these little bins? You would never do that. That's a pure legacy of the fact that the printing press was invented before the internet. If you think only in the internet world, that's clearly not the way that we should do this. I and others have been arguing quite strongly for an alternative way of thinking about publishing, which is to think about it not as a system where journals decide what gets published and then, and that publication happens after peer review, but via a fundamental inversion of the timing of this. And this is kind of taken on this idea of publish, review, curate, where we publish works first, then we review them, and then we do some form of curation to put labels on them to help people find stuff and know what stuff is important. So how does that work? Publish is already done. It's already possible for any biomedical scientist in the world to publish their work for free almost instantaneously by submitting it to bioRxiv. So I'm not going to dwell on that. We've solved the problem of publishing if people want to take advantage of it. Review is relatively easy to think of in the context of bioRxiv. And you have a paper, it's published on bioRxiv. Instead of putting it through some weird process where it's submitted to a journal and the journal decides whether or not to publish it based on a bunch of reviews, but the reviews kind of never see the light of day. All that anyone ever sees is a thumbs up or thumbs down decision on the paper. It is now possible via a system bioRxiv has created, and it is something that we have embraced at eLife to just post these reviews directly onto the preprint on bioRxiv. So for many papers, basically any paper that we've reviewed recently in eLife, we just post the reviews directly onto bioRxiv, and you can make use of them and see them and make your own judgments about what they mean about the work of the paper. Right? You can easily imagine a system where review happens openly and transparently, layered on top of preprints. It happens not just once by one journal at one fixed point in time, but happens continuously throughout the lifespan of papers. A world where reviews are actually meant to help science and scientists think about papers, not to help journals decide whether to publish them. It's possible to have multiple different groups oversee the process to ensure diversity of perspectives and so forth, and to give scientists an opportunity to participate in the system whenever they read a paper, not just when a journal happened to ask them for their opinion. I'm not going to dwell too much on curation because this is still a work in progress, but you can also easily imagine organizing the literature based on journal title. And I'll give you my kind of simplistic way of thinking about it. I'm sure we can do and will do better. But if you read a paper and you review a paper, rather than having it doing that in the service of an individual journal, why not just tell the people who are reading the paper what journal you think the paper should be in? This is an elemental form of curation that would, in one fell swoop, completely replace all journals by their titles alone. And once you do that, you start to think about better and better and better ways to do it, and new ways to organize and curate the literature that would be far, far, far more better than that. But it's very simple to imagine how to do that. At eLife, we're thinking about the technology we need to make this happen and what it's going to be like in a world where papers are published as preprints and then they're reviewed, and how you access reviews and how you organize people's kind of almost social networks around who's reviewing papers that you're interested in and so forth. It's very much a nascent idea, but it's one that I think whose time has come. And one last thing before I finish, this system, right? The $10 billion a year we currently spend, the vast majority of it is wasted. It's wasted on inefficiencies and having 50,000 journals. It's wasted on profits for the publishers. It's wasted on formatting articles that don't need to be formatted. So it's going to cost a lot less, but it will cost something. And I think it's really critical for us to, while we're doing this, to rethink a little bit the whole psychology of funding science publishing. I think everybody agrees that subscriptions and paywalls are awful, but so are APCs. Page charges for journals, I think they're better, but they create a different kind of access barrier for researchers. If your entire research budget for the year is a few thousand euros, which it is for many researchers across the world, the idea that somebody would pay 10,000 euros just to get their paper into Nature is alien. It's also unnecessary. We need a system. The only system that makes any sense is one where the funders of science view publishing as a utility. The costs are covered directly by some consortium of the world's research funders in proportion to their funding, or however you think you can do it in a fair way. And nobody ever has to pay to use it. You don't pay as an author, you don't pay as a user, you don't pay as a reader. This would work. It would be cheaper, it would be more robust, and it would be better for science. So we have to embrace that. And I'll just end on this last point, which is that all those points are, all that effort, all these changes are for naught if we create a system that has any kind of barriers for users. It also, if we want this world to exist, we have to focus on all the other ways in which science is unfair. We can't let a system of science publishing, amplify and worsen inequalities that exist in science in other ways. So we can solve this problem. We can create a new publishing system, but even that is only the beginning of trying to make a science publishing system that actually fully works. All right. Sorry, I went a little fast since I was trying to keep within time, and I would love to take your questions.
That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, Professor Eisen. We have a couple of questions, and whereas the rest of the people is asking more questions, I would like to ask you, are there any limitations in the words in these publications, or no limitations? Because something that we were discussing at the beginning of this mini symposium is the problems with the reproducibility of the papers, and usually it comes because there are limitations and the methods are not properly explained. So I'm wondering if you bypass that problem.
Well, so yeah, I mean, in a more expanded version of the talk, I would emphasize that, part of the problem we have with science publishing right now is that people write papers to be reviewed, right? Like, people don't write, like, your fundamental interest when you're writing a paper is to get it published in a journal. And so a lot of the things that you really should be thinking about, like, how can someone use my data? How can someone use my methods? How can someone, really judge whether or not I did this science right? Those things are not front and center in your mind as an author, because what you've been told to care about by the science, by the system, is where you publish it. So I think that one of the things that one would hope would happen if we liberate ourselves from journal title as the goal and make it so that papers are reviewed continuously in an open way, is that people, individual scientists or organized, review boards or whoever, would focus precisely on questions like that, which is this work reproducible? Have you provided me with enough information that I can replicate the work, that the methods are described well, and start to evaluate papers in a meaningful way based not on, are the results important, but are the results reliable? Are they described in a way that I can use them? There's some efforts to do that. And, I think you have to be careful to not turn this into kind of a cult of reproducibility. But I think that, right now we have only one way in which your work is evaluated, right? Like, if you publish a paper in Nature and it turns out to not be reproducible, to have methods that are poorly explained, it's still a Nature paper, and no one's ever going to take that away from you, right? Like there's no, because it's the only thing that matters, it's the only thing that matters. And, you know, I really do think this is just simply about incentives, that scientists are not, you know, they just haven't been provided with both the incentives and the means to communicate their work in a way that would make it reproducible. So one thing we've been doing at eLife with some collaborators is creating a different type of paper that is actually just a executable document, you know, for people who write, you know, who do a lot of their work in code and things like that. These are papers where, you know, the paper contains all the data and all the analyses and all the code you need to generate the figures. That the idea is to move towards a world where you can interact with papers that way. I think we all know that, like, you know, like half the time I want data from a paper, it's in a PDF, which isn't even a text PDF, it's an image that's been turned into a PDF. It's just like it's just the whole process is not designed to help other people use, interact with, validate your data. And I think it really isn't because scientists don't want that. It's because they don't have an incentive to do it. And I think, you know, one of the things we'd like to see happen is to create that kind of incentive structure for scientists to describe their science in a way that makes it useful.
So based on this, we have tools like these examples where we can quickly publish our data, have open access to our data, be reproducible, not depend so much of the reviews and all of this political part. But then on the other hand, we are still depending for our promotion, so where we are publishing, right? So in this line, Joaquin Lopez is mentioning great talk, Michael, but I think that there is something missing in this publishing review curate approach. How will you run the value quality of the papers? Just by number of times the paper has been read, with a 5-star evaluation from readers, with the tons of current paper runs are useful, right?
Right. So that's why I mentioned this idea that like let's just say that the first thing you do, like as a beginning way of doing it. So I should say at eLife, we're trying to do that. We're trying to write a description for every review that is basically an evaluation of how impactful and to whom the science will matter and be of use. To do that in a polite, positive way, but to try to convey what the editorial judgment of the reviewers is to a wide audience. You know, we don't pretend that that's the only thing people will want. That's why, I mean, I only say it half jokingly that we should just review a paper and say what journal it goes into, right? I say that not because I think we should do that because we get sued, but just to convey the idea that you don't need to have a system where journals accept or reject individual papers to create a framework for putting papers, you know, for sort of hanging papers on it. It doesn't have to be as simple as a 5-star review. It can be something even, you know, a little bit more complicated to say, how well executed do you think the science is? How creative is the ideas? How important are the results and to whom? All those are things that are conveyed by journal title right now, but it should be easy. We're smart scientists. We've done a lot of really cool things as scientists. I'm sure we can create a system that is at least as informative as journal title in helping you understand what the reviewers and editors think about a paper, but doesn't in make it so like distorting, right? Like I think we all know that the difference between the difference in terms of the importance and quality of science of a paper that is just barely rejected from versus barely accepted at a journal like Nature it's indistinguishable and probably random. And yet the career impact of that is way nonlinear, right? Like you get this huge benefit for crossing an arbitrary line that someone drew in the sand between Nature and not Nature. Like we have to not only create a system that de-emphasizes that, but that actually makes it more, you know, is more respectful of the fact that you know, there's a wide range of science that's valuable, and it's not only things that go in the highest impact journals. So it's complicated. I don't mean to say it's a simple problem, but it's well within our power as a scientific community to come up with something that works.
I have a personal question. Where do you get the funding for?
So you know, eLife, it's funded by big private funders, HHMI, Wellcome Trust, Max Planck, and a growing number of other funders have come online to work with us. So I think funders are interested in you know, the funders who are interested in fixing the system, who see it as a problem for science, but also because they have to spend tons of money on a broken system. They're investing in trying to make a better worse. I hope eventually all funders will kind of I don't want them to give money to eLife necessarily. I mean to the system, right? We need them to fund publishing writ large and to see that they have a real interest in doing so.
That's wonderful to hear, because if everybody who is on the top is already funding this kind of initiatives, they believe that is necessary. Because I can see in the chat a lot of questions in the same direction, just saying that they are hesitant, they need publications for doctorate, for promotions. But if everybody start believing in that this is the direction to go.
That's, you know, my feeling. I mean, I saw a bunch of questions here about the transition, and that's kind of the issue, right? I think several things have to happen. One is right now that we're building this system in parallel to the publishing world, right? So we are, you know, eLife still publishes a journal. We still accept and reject papers. So one of the nice things about bioRxiv is that it doesn't replace journals automatically. Like you can post your paper on bioRxiv, you can have it openly peer reviewed, and you can still have it published in a journal. Our hope is that we will create a system built around bioRxiv that eventually people will see as better than journals, and they will no longer think it is necessary to submit their papers to journals. But we you know, the reality of the world we live in now is that people have to still publish in journals. So we're very focused on this you know, this parallel strategy that once, you know, it's on us to create a system that people find more attractive, that people start to look at when they're giving people grants and hiring them. I think we're starting to see that, like in the US at least, virtually all faculty candidates that we're evaluating have preprints as part of their package, right? They may have published papers also, but they are relying increasingly on preprints, and preprints don't have a journal name attached to them. So people have to either read them themselves or judge them in a different way. So I think the era in which the only thing that matters in people's mind is journal title is already ending, just because people are taking advantage of preprints. So our hope is that we will hasten that process and make it easier for people to do that, and so forth. So
that's wonderful. So I'm going to finish like that. The era of impact factors is ending, and this is thanks to people with these disruptive minds like you. So thank you.
I will also I see there's a bunch of questions in the Q&A, which I will answer you know, I will now answer after as the next talk goes on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move forward with the last table. Let me share my screen. And here we go. So it's my pleasure to present the last panel that has been moderated by Luis Quevedo, scientific journalist. Luis Quevedo is an internationally award-winning Spanish producer, presenter, entrepreneur, and journalist, educated as a scientist and trained in communication. He has developed his informative work in Spain, United States, and Latin America, and has been lectured at prestigious universities such as Columbia, Yale, and the City University of New York, among others. He has written and directed 2 award-winning documentaries on human evolution. He is co-founder of the Ondas Award podcast platform Cuonda. And in 2018, he premiered the 6-episode documentary series, De Otra Ciencia. Most probably all of you are aware of that one. A new science space on Telemadrid, and puts a scientific perspective on the Spanish TV one in the Lones, also very famous, of Vaya Clark. In the roundtable, Luis I will have the honor to count also as panelists like Cynthia Graver, who is a co-founder, gastropod, and award-winning radio producer, also connected from here, from Boston in United States. Ramon Salaverria, journalist, professor, and digital media researcher at University of Navarra in Spain. And Elena Hidalgo, director of Pint of Science and 3 Minutes PhD pitch at University of Valladolid. Thank you very much to all of you.
Hello, good afternoon, and probably good morning to somebody. It is a real pleasure to be here among friends and colleagues, and also those I don't know yet. But this is a pretty amazing crowd. I've been told over 200 people from all over the world. This is a kind of a different session, right? We will try to either convince those of you who are unsure about the value of publicly communicating, so beyond academia, your results, your science, maybe even not even your own results and research projects, but also just being public intellectuals in a more engaged way, if I may put it this way. And my role here, it's just moderating 3 voices, 3 people with amazing profiles. The way we thought about these few minutes we're going to spend together, it's that I'll give a few minutes to each and every speaker to speak their minds, to make a quick, brief presentation. I believe we are going to be not using a keynote PowerPoint slides. This is going to be more of an oral session. And then we'll have both all together dialogue, but also we'll be open to your questions. I hope that we will get way more questions than we will be able to answer. So I please implore the help of the organization to perhaps annotate or just keep track of questions that we can maybe later on answer in some different manner, be it by email or a different way. Now, with that said, let me briefly, do we have an order, a clear order? Because otherwise I'm gonna start with Elena. Do you have your mic ready, Elena?
Yes.
Okay, so Elena Hidalgo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you. And it's an honor to talk about the first in this panel. Why do I think that talk to big people, to broad, large audience? Well, there are several reasons. The first is because we all need science, and first, I think that the society is funding us for a big deal. And sorry, can you start with another people, because I'm not feeling very well tonight. Can you start with another? I need to leave for 2 minutes.
Luis, you're muted.
All right,
there you go.
Sure. No worries. Cynthia, you ready? Do you want to take it now?
Sure.
Please, go ahead.
So it's an interesting question to hope to convince people of. It's something that never even occurred to me that it was a question, because I got my master's in science journalism when I was in my 20s here in Boston University. I didn't study science as an undergraduate. I just was always really fascinated by the world. And my first interest was environmental science and kind of, frankly, like saving the world. I wanted to be a journalist to help other people understand how the world works, to care about how the world works, to be engaged, to be curious. And to me, it's all about curiosity and understanding and engagement and accuracy as much as it can be. I launched Gastropod with my co-host Nikki almost 7 years ago. It's a show about the history and science of food. And before that, I've covered everything from biotech to genetics, environmental science, which I covered for a long time, health issues. I've covered everything. And now I really focus on food as a way to explore these questions of science and history. And it offers such a rich opportunity to get a wide variety of people to engage in science, because certainly some people come to the show because they are natively interested in science, and some people because they're interested in history, or some people really just, they love food. We always say everybody eats, right? So we kind of hope that we have a way to appeal to everyone. But I think a lot of people who listen to us, that we're one of their most trusted sources of science journalism, because they may come because they're interested to hear stories about how the carrot got orange. But next thing you know, they're learning about genetics or viruses or microbes and soil science and water and all sorts of things. That food is a way to talk about science in the world in a very rich way, which I really enjoy.
Cynthia, do you find it easy on the average to, or rather, do you find yourself at times needing to really put pressure, convince scientists, researchers to actually give you an interview, or even give you a good interview, if you know what I mean? So go the extra mile to make everything easy for the audience, so that in the end, they end up being better represented?
Well, so the good thing about a show like Gastropod, as opposed to a straight interview show, like they often have on Science Friday in America, which Luis had worked on, and even like some of the work you do yourself, which is straight interviews, is I don't have to worry about if the scientist is good at it, because my job is to keep asking questions until I understand it well enough. And then I use their voice, because Gastropod is what we call a produced podcast. So we do a number of different interviews and we weave them together into a story where we call cuts in the business, or quotes from scientists and historians and chefs and all sorts of people, and we create the narrative around it. So my role as a journalist is still to hold the listener's hand and make sure that they're not confused. I don't ever think of it as talking down to the audience, but I kind of accompany them, and I try to anticipate what their questions will be and make sure that we answer those questions as they arise in their mind. Now, certainly sometimes when we're interviewing certain scientists, we may need to say, I don't quite understand that, or that word won't be understandable to our audience. Do you have another way that you might phrase that? But frankly, we also can come in and do that as long as we understand what they're talking about. When we don't usually have a hard time convincing people to talk to us. I mean, I think it helps at this point that we're actually quite big. We have a very sizable audience around the world. And if we think there's going to be some hesitation, when we introduce ourselves, we usually use the words like award-winning, internationally popular podcast, just so that people think they take us seriously.
Are there any regional differences? Meaning, I know the show is in English, so hey, most of your speakers, of course, will be either native or at least fluent in English, right? But since you've worked all over the world in Gastropod and elsewhere in other projects, do you feel there's a difference in how we are prepared to speak to the public from academia?
I think so I did a lot of work in Spain a long time ago. And I think there was at the time, and hopefully it's changed by now, a different understanding of kind of the value of communicating. I think there's a pretty strong science ecosystem here that I think maybe was a little more confusing when I first was doing some reporting in Spain. I have a very close friend who's an editor of science editor of a newspaper in Colombia. And they're also, I think depending on the culture in the country, they might see more or less value in talking to the press. They might not think, in Colombia, my friend has to even fight with other reporters to not print pseudoscience in his newspaper. So perhaps the scientists are a little more hesitant because they're unsure of whether or not their work will be accurately represented. We do interview people around the world. We do need to do we've done some interviews in other languages. Mostly I did a story in Colombia that we then used on the show. And we do plan on traveling more once we can again, post-COVID. I I think it's just maybe an understanding of the value in communicating science through the media is a little different, perhaps depending on the strength of the science journalism in that country, which in some places just for a lot of other reasons is weaker than it is here.
Let me ask now, Ramon, because you mentioned, journalists trying to avoid colleagues publishing pseudoscience and the value of information and good science communication in the media. And I think Ramon has an amazing insight and research career devoted to that. Ramon, what's your take on this issue?
Well, actually, I'm a former journalist. I worked as a journalist a long time ago, and now I'm a trainer or teacher of forthcoming journalists and also researchers. So I belong both to journalism and to the science sphere. And since the title of this panel is Science Communication to the Broad Public, I believe my insights can actually take part, both parts, both the part of journalism and science. And I would like to locate my insights into the current situation, because the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that a quality communication of science is crucial for contemporary societies. And the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed that a combination of factors are increasing the mis and disinformation of science and health issues particularly. So I believe that both the work of scientists, a good work done by scientists and journalists is needed to clean the situation that we have in the current societies. But there are several factors, in my opinion, that are polluting these spheres. From the science part, I will mention first the acceleration of scientific publication process and the weakening of reviewing protocols. A few minutes ago, Michael Eisen was talking about that. I believe that the express science, as it has been called, it's a problem because we need a better system that can be able to produce a better and more accessible science. Secondly, I will mention the limited outreach activity of a large part of scientific community, because most, actually, I could say many, but I believe, in my opinion, that most of scientists are more interested, more worried about their own career than other social impact of the activities that they are doing. Also due to the systems that within they are working. I don't know if probably it's different depending on the countries, but my impression here in Spain is that this is a real problem, that scientists are generally little worried about the outreach activity that they can do. And the third aspects that I will mention within the science, it will be the inadequate transfer to the society of the knowledge produced in the scientific journals. There is a lack of connection between the scientific, the science sphere and the social sphere. And since I have, as I mentioned at the beginning, worked as a journalist for a while, I see also several factors that are producing problems to transfer science properly to society. First, I will mention that the difficult transformation that the media is suffering towards digital models, because many media outlets today have weaker teams and less qualified professional staff in some issues. The people is more multitasking in many times and less specialized in some issues. It's hard to find in many media people that are able, journalists that are able to deal with quality information. And this is why for instance, podcasts like Cynthia's and some others are doing a very good job because they're much more specialized. Also, I will mention that there is still a lack of an adequate scientific culture in many journalists. I am a professor of journalism myself, and still today, journalism is seen like a more romantic activity than something that should be connected to accuracy, to strict methodologies and things like that. So I don't want to, probably we will have the opportunity to dig into these questions, but I believe that both the science journalism have many homework to do in order to produce a better communications that finally gets the proper service for the society.
Ramon, let me ask you one thing, because if I understood correctly, you mentioned two trends, right? That I presume they're kind of somewhat opposite. So on the one hand, the popularization, right? We're getting poorer in journalism because we are fewer with fewer resources, in one sense at least. The classic legacy media, right? Operation is getting poorer. And so I'm thinking if perhaps now more than ever, it's never been a bad idea, but perhaps nowadays would be great if scientists took an extra step forward and became somewhat more media savvy, because they can make up for, where media is not gonna reach. If I don't know if I'm making a point here, but
Absolutely, Luis. I believe that legacy media has been used to target to big audiences, and that meant that they should have an approach to news that was generally, I don't know, more general, not so specific. But since the digital environment, the digital landscape has produced a new shape of audiences, more targeted, more they can be located in Boston or in Pamplona or in Madrid. Doesn't matter actually. The point that gathered those people is that they are interested in very specific topic. So you can find audience in all over the world. I mean, you don't need to find someone who is interested in your surrounding area, and that's one of the biggest changes. And obviously, Cynthia can tell us about that. But looking for audiences globally is a hard task. But it's something that can be done. And in my opinion, those niche media are the ones that are doing this goal in the best way, in my opinion. Yeah.
We are kind of in the business of the long tail in media production, right? We can produce, and also there's something that I'll ask you later on, but that I'm kind of fascinated because we've all, I mean, we're having this event in English, right? And we've all seen, and Cynthia is a sort of an exponent of that, how English podcasting has, blossomed in a way. I mean, it's amazing. And not so much so in Spanish language. And I'm kind of weirded out by this thing because I tried Spanish podcasting a few years ago in New York when I was in Science Friday. For some reason, it's not taking off the same way. But let me close this first round since I kind of suggested that maybe researchers could be doing something more, and I think that it's not only to make up for media's lack of resources or transformation or what have you, but also because there's something in it for them. Elena, what's in it for researchers to learn how to communicate to the broad public?
Yeah, I think that's a big point. In general, the divulgation of information, scientific information, is not important for a scientific career. And that's why many scientists are not interested in talking to other people that are not in their own surroundings. But on the other hand, I think that in society, first, we have the right of being informed. So we should be informed of everything that is important for our lives. And secondly, it's not only our right, it's also our obligation. Otherwise, we are in the hands of people that are doing what they want with us, with our way of thinking, with our thoughts, with our feelings. So it's very important not only to transmit information, scientific information to all kinds of people, but especially to people that are not from the beginning interested in what you are going to talk to them. In the case of Ramon and Cynthia, perhaps people are looking for this kind of information. So they are looking for this kind of podcasts or this kind of specific information. And there are other formulas, other strategies to go to people that are not interested in science. It's much more difficult, of course, because you have to break the barrier they put in front of science. Science is difficult to understand, it's just for specialists and so on. And this kind of formula like 3MT or Pint of Science is much more broad than this. So the idea is that people can come to this kind of contests or this kind of situations because they know the people that are presenting, for example, or because the specific subject that is going to be discussed is of their interest. But for me, the most important point is to go to people that are not interested at all in these kind of things. We should raise the level of scientific culture in all our countries. And that's very much important to be more exigent with our governors, you know, to be more, to help not only scientific knowledge, scientific information, but also scientific methodology, which is something that is we forget many times. And I think that's important to planify, to plan everything, to go through our plans and to evaluate and to share and to publish. Well, to publish like after the session today, I think publishing is not so important. Anyway, to share the information and to be subject of discussion and to share with peers, but also with people that are not in the same field.
It has been interesting, and I'm bringing the Q&A section here. By the way, anyone who's interested down below, you know, you can post your questions or comments rather. In this case, Alberto Ruiz is saying that he doesn't agree with the assertion that scientists in general are not interested in doing outreach. Perhaps I overdid it. What I meant was that perhaps they don't do it. Let's put it that way. So in the end, they don't do it. So in between the desire and the facts of doing outreach and quality outreach, Cynthia, let me ask you, how can we approach a better scientific outreach? How can we learn what to do and what not to do when dealing with scientists? With journalists.
With journalists. Well, I was remembering after I answered your previous question that when we were in Europe a few years ago, we had people ask us if we were going to pay them for interviews, which journalists don't do. We never pay for interviews. And then we had done like an hour interview in the Netherlands, and the person looked at us and said, "Okay, so you'll send it over for my approval before you publish it." And we both said, "No, of course not. That's not how journalism works. I mean, we fact check what we do, and we likely will get in touch, you know, and say, just want to make sure these details are correct. We're very careful about that. But you, as a scientist, it is not the journalist. I think one thing that scientists sometimes get a little confused about when it comes to science journalism is they see the journalist as a mouthpiece for their science, as the journalist is the one who's going to take their science and communicate it to the world. But that's not actually my job as a journalist. My job is to understand what your work is. I may have some critical questions about your work. I'm going to talk to maybe some of your peers. I'm going to put it in a bigger context. I am not your tool to get your information out to the public. I hopefully am a partner in the sense that, you know, we both have, well, we might not both have the same goal. I may actually disagree with the results of how you interpret the results of your research. So I think that's a point to understand, is that the journalist's job is not the same as the scientist's job, but you can help the journalist do their job well by explaining your research well and in the type of language that's accessible to other people, and making sure that, you know, everybody got kind of, even journalists, like those of us in audio, I get caught up in the lingo that we use within the world of audio. And sometimes I have to remember that other people don't use the same language for things, and that we all have specialized language, and we need to kind of take a step back and think about how to explain it so that, you know, your neighbor who may not be in the same field as you, or frankly, the scientist down the hall who has a different specialty, will also understand it. I don't like, there's also a phrase like, how would you tell your grandmother? And I think that's very offensive to grandmothers and women and all sorts of people. But I think, you know, how would you explain this to somebody who's not in the same field as you, is a good way to think about it.
Right. And when that doesn't happen, as is the case very often, I'm going to say this, we let the door open to people who are better skilled at communicating, whether they are using it to communicate the right or better or best scientific evidence,
or accurate,
or not, or accurate or not. And this is something that, Ramon, I would, if you may, you and I talked a few months in the past about this research group that you lead that actually is dealing with fake news, and that sort of the pandemic happened to you because you were doing that, and then just it all exploded. I would love for you to explain a little bit of that and what you've learned in the process.
Thank you, Luis. Well, the first question will be that I don't like the expression fake news at all. I think it's much more
forgive me.
accurate.
I know you don't.
Accurate. No, it's a kind of joke with you, because actually, if you are framing the disinformation as fake news, you are putting the deception, you are blaming the media for being deceptive. That's the point that I would like to stress. So I don't think the media is only the blameful for that. Obviously, some of the misbehaviors in the media are conducive to deception, but it's not the only problem, and it's not the main problem at all, in my opinion. But it's true. We have developed here in Spain a research about the disinformation about health issues and COVID-19 over the last year. And it has been very interesting to see how the people is affected by this phenomenon. It's a big problem, which has several characteristics. We found in our research study, which is available. I mean, if anyone is interested, I can share it. It's open, by the way. It's open access. Well, we found that a sort of typology of hoaxes or disinformation types, and we found that obviously there is a false informations, fabricated informations, something which is entirely false, but at the same time there are lesser levels of falsehood, which are also within this framework of disinformation, and those are the exaggerations, which means that you are providing a part of true information, but together with that, you are providing false information. You are also providing another kind of information, which is decontextualization. you put a real content. For instance, it usually is a photograph or even a video, and you say, you see what is happening in a supermarket? People is looting the supermarket in this city, and it is actually people looting in a supermarket, but that problem didn't happen in that city, or is a movie that was is a video that was taken a couple of years ago, things like that. I mean, that's decontextualization. And finally, we have the joke. Many people just without willing to produce any falsehood or fake news or disinformation process, they put some information in which they are not sure, but there is always someone who believes that information and who shares with his peers, and that produces a disinformation channel. So it is a social problem. It is happening in many countries, and I believe that is something that it's very related to the topics that we are analyzing today. Yeah.
There is something, and I'll ask you all about open science, and we have a question here in the Q&A panel. But before, let me ask you about something, and I'll start by Elena, if you're okay with that. Now, Ramon was mentioning the kind of, I'm going to say problems. I know they're not fake news, but you know, the trouble we're experiencing with information and a lot of science and health information as of late. Increasingly, at least. And it is often the case that from academia, I'm not going to blame or you know, say everyone thinks like that, but it is often the case that from academia, these kind of issues are solved in principle with data, or papers, or the right information, right? Meaning, there is a belief that the meat of the science, the content, will be sufficient, will suffice to change people's minds. And I think that is something that it's hard when you've been trained for years in academia to think otherwise, right? That communication has the technique, the way you communicate has no purchase power in the actual value of that communication. So, Elena, what do you think we can do to convince or persuade researchers that how you communicate is oftentimes as important, or even more, if I'm allowed to say, than what you are communicating?
Sure. I completely agree. I think there are two different problems. On one hand, we have the journalists that need a title. How many times in television or in radio we discuss for a long time, and then they ask us, give me a title. I don't want to give you a title. What I want is to explain things and to introduce the nuances and the arguments.
But we need it, Elena, we need it.
I know that
we need the one-liner.
But it's difficult to combine with the methodology of sciences that is coming back and forward again. So to analyze again what has already been analyzed several times, and to go further step by step. And also to introduce the fact that we don't know everything. You need an answer, short answer, impacting answer. And we are more used to discuss and to say, on one hand we have this, on the other hand we have this. It looked like, and in this pandemic we have be so affected by this kind of situation in which when the scientists say something, don't use this, don't use this, AstraZeneca is wonderful, is not so wonderful, and then the title is AstraZeneca is dangerous. AstraZeneca is not dangerous. The danger is to give a very short and very impacting title instead of going to the deep.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's or media rather advocate here, but it ain't going to happen. Often, I mean, please, Cynthia.
I'm not sure.
Correct me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with Elena that when I see, I think, well, first of all, Elena, you probably, Luis, you know this, but Elena, you might know this. Journalists often, especially newspaper journalists in America, don't write their own headlines. Other people write those headlines. And often the writers of the articles get very mad at the headlines that get written. So just a little bit of like, it's not our fault. But I agree. I think that sometimes the headlines are meant to be clickbait, even at really wonderful, legacy media outlets. And the information, if you only look at the headline that they convey, is inaccurate and isn't the whole picture. And I think that that's something that needs to change. I agree with you.
So let me
Luis, you
argue. No, it's not that I argue. I wish for it to be true, but I'm forced to deal with reality as of now. Meaning I want to go there, but what I oftentimes think is that it is very good for researchers that are going to deal with the media to, one, know how we in the media think. So to be very, very privy to the one-liner, so what it means, so that there is a way to, and I'm gonna quote this, there is a way to manipulate the media for your own purpose. So meaning to keep science more pristine, if you want. If you know what we want, you can format a little bit the message in a way that gives you advantage, and it's better for us, because if you give me the visuals, the title, the summary of what's going on, and it clicks, it makes sense, chances are I'm gonna buy, right? Normally.
Yeah,
that's what I meant.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the first part of my speech was about what do we feel that journalists ask us. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that we scientists in general don't think a lot on what's the kind of people we had in front of us. So sometimes we need a little bit more empathy to know what's the average level of people, what words they can understand, what concept they cannot understand if you don't explain. And nowadays there are beautiful scientists that are very good at communication for broad people, broad society, but it's not very common. It's not very common. And I think that, as you were mentioning before, in the career of a scientist, we should have more communication skills. We need that. We spend our time in communicating, but in general, in a very, very narrow group with people that are understanding the same concept, the same words, and we don't have to explain anything because it's already known. We only have to explain our new data, new ciphers, new numbers, but not to explain the basis. And I think that's very, very important. And more people are interested in analyzing the way we communicate, in analyzing the way we are speaking to people that are not on our fields. And in general, when I teach this kind of skills to other people, to students, in PhD students and master students, they are always very grateful because they are aware that they need that. But in general, at least in Spain, during academy, when communication is not good, you get bad points, but you never get feedback. What can I do to improve these kind of things? In writing, in speaking, in graphic, so I think it's becoming more and more important, but in this moment, people are not very much interested. And there is another reason. I think it was Eva Mendez at the beginning of this session that she was saying she had a lot of hats, different things to do in her life. And I think that sometimes academy professors are overloaded with so different tasks and so many different tasks to do, because we have to publish as much as people that don't do other things. We have to teach as much as people that are not doing research. We have to communicate. We have to many things to do. So sometimes you have to choose. And there are people that are choosing research, there are people that are choosing teaching, and it's very difficult to have a good teacher, good researcher, and good communicator at the same time.
I know there are a handful of laboratories, at least I know one, led by Susana Martinez Conde. I think it was NYU or New York State University. I don't quite remember, sorry. And they chose, and Cynthia, you must know a few of these laboratories. They actually have a science communicator in-house. They paid with grant money to have somebody who's half a scientist, half a research scientist and half a science communicator in her day-to-day job, so that they produce amazing quality science outreach materials. And it's an interesting way of putting it. I'd like to ask you all three, and I'll start by Ramon. Do you think that the COVID-19 has risen interest in science in general among the general public, and the question is, will it last?
Yeah, absolutely. Although that interest has changed over the past over the time. Obviously, in the first month, there was a huge need or interest on pandemic related news, and after that we had exactly the opposite. I mean, now there are several studies analyzing the so-called news avoidance, because there are so many bad news around us that we are fed up of those bad news. But I believe that some aspects will remain for the future. For instance, the strength of the data journalism. We've seen that presenting information with data, with graphics, with such elements is very convenient, and people use that. In the past, before the pandemic, data journalism was used only for a specific coverage, but not for a continuous coverage of information. And now we've seen that data journalism is something that we are using every day, and I believe that will remain in the future for sure. Yeah.
Apologies, Cynthia. What do you think about the impact of COVID-19 pandemics and interest in science?
I really don't know. I have friends who write about the pandemic and about COVID, and people read what they are writing religiously. They write for the New York Times, and their articles are kind of at the top of the New York Times hit list. People want to know what's going on. Everyone's turned into an epidemiologist these days, trying to understand, if I do this, is my chance increased, and what's my risk if I do this? I feel like I'm acting both as a meteorologist. What's the weather exactly like? Can I spend any time outside? Will my heat lamp work, or is there too much wind? But I'm not convinced that it's going to stick around after any more so than before. I think this is very much, this has a very direct impact on people's lives. And the more, to me, what we do in Gastropod is obviously the science is very connected to the stories we're telling and connected to your life. And the more, it's just science is interwoven with stories that are connected to people's lives. I think the better we all are, and the better the public is, whether or not the current interest in understanding mRNA vaccines and how much that's going to translate to reading about science in the future, I have no idea.
Elena, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a challenge, because now we have many people interested in these kind of things, at least in PCR, in viruses, in vaccines, and in the immunity system, how to react to any other things that is arriving to us, to our body. And I think it's a challenge that we should take profit of. So I think it's a good idea to take profit of this situation in which some people are more interested than before in following news, scientific news. And I think we should take advantage of this. So perhaps it's the moment of convince more scientists to communicate to different levels also, because I think that when I think of broad society, broad public audience, I'm not thinking of many people at the same time, but people of different situations. Children, old people, people that are not scientists, in the schools, in the academy also. And I think that once we have created this interest, because it was so close to us, I think it's a challenge that we should take advantage of.
I mean, at least we've been exposed, right? Not only to the coronavirus, but also to science in streaming, science live, right? So we can at least make the best of it, and so no, perhaps a minimal share of that people now reading, you know, minute by minute columns on the Times, maybe they develop a taste for the scientific view, not for science, but the thing that science can play a role in your media diet or your view of the world. That would be an amazing legacy of this otherwise disgusting last few months, right?
There's one thing that is happening now, I think it's a good idea, is to take a little bit of the information that they are interested in, for example, PCR, or for example, vaccines or whatever, and to take from this another story that's completely different. For example, we are working with PCR, but in vegetables, in plants, in forestries, or in agriculture. So from something that is already in their minds, they have heard about that, so there's something interesting around that, to take this thread and to go to another point and to open, to widen the point of view and the points of interest.
That would be great. And if we all learn a little bit how Cynthia does her magic, because she does story-driven science in a masterful way, that's amazing. And so we can avoid the Ramon. I'll be clear with that. Disinformation, you know, information troubles, no fake news. I'm trying, but it's so convenient, so easy. Of course, there's always less time that we'd love to. There are a handful of comments and questions that will be here in the Q&A. We'll figure it out at a later time. I want to really express my gratitude, my deep gratitude to Cynthia, to Elena, to Ramon for sharing this minutes with us, and the previous, you know, preparing the session has been great. I hope it's been a treat for you all as well. Thank you for the organization, and please give it a try. Learn a little bit about how to communicate better. Because it's never going to end in a bad way. It's going to be better for everyone involved, I believe. Thank you so very much, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Luis. It was a really interesting roundtable. I have seen that there are a lot of questions. Now everybody wants to be a scientific communicator, so it's because of you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time today. Okay, so we are moving to the last part of the mini symposium. They are the final remarks. I'm going to share with all of you my desktop in 1 second. All right. I just want to send a kind reminder that if you want, you can have a free certificate of attendance to this mini symposium, this global mini symposium. And if you want to do it, you have to sign in and fill in the exit survey that you are going to find at the end of this global mini symposium. And right now, it's my pleasure to introduce you Daniel Morillo Sotelo. Thanks to his precious help, and also to Maria Soriano, all of this global mini symposium is possible. So a big applause to both of them for making it possible. Daniel Morillo is the subdirector of doctoral school at University of Ayadalis, and also from IMFAHE Foundation, we have the honor to count with Joaquin Lopez Herraiz, who is the Director of Innovation at IMFAHE Foundation, and also he is a professor at University Complutense of Madrid in Spain. So they are going to give the final remarks, and it has been a pleasure to take care of the Q&As and introduce all of the speakers. Stay safe wherever you are, and see you around soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Zafira, for the presentation. Let me just share a slide because I want to share with you basically some of the remarks of this session. It's really impressive. This is a very hot topic, as hopefully all of you have seen today. We're talking about open science, and this is something that from the presentations that we have seen today, it's something that researchers and society have been pursuing for many, many years. And it seems that it's about to become a global reality due to internet and due to all the efforts that we have seen from professors, institutions, and all the stakeholders. So let me just share.
Sorry, Joaquin, can you put it in the presentation?
Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
So, yeah, basically, I just want to give you a brief summary of the things that we have seen in the first three sessions. Daniel from University of Valladolid will give you more comments on the following ones. I basically want to have a slide with all the resources, which I think that it is something really valuable. So we really want to thank the speakers for all the effort that they have done just to give information that that allows us to go beyond this mini symposium. Of course, there are many things that we would like to talk and discuss, but I think that it is a good starting point to have these links so that anyone who are interested on specific things, they can just go and continue. I really like the purpose of this symposium, especially just thinking about not just having an open discussion about these topics, but a practical approach about what are the pros, the cons, what are the limitations, what are the initiatives that are available right now. And I would start with talking about what David Melior from Center for Open Science has shared with us, and it's good that he shared the slides, so all the links are there, and talking about some specific interesting topics, especially the concept of pre-registration, that is all this open science requires some efforts. We need to change the way that we have been doing science traditionally, and I think that this is a good example of that. Just thinking about all the hypothesis testing or hypothesis generation, and how to make sure that you are not mixing both methods, and how to make clear what are the purpose of your research, and how to basically make the most of your time, your effort, the resources. And this is good not only for the research itself, but also from the point of view of funders who actually wants to know that the resources that they are allocating for science are making the best use of it. And it is interesting that all these initiatives for the repositories of data, they are connected with the effort from the European Union. We have seen or heard about the European Cloud, which is something that I recommend you also to take a look at. And this is connected with the vision that's about this topic that Eva Mendez has shared with us, more on the perspective of the European Union policies. And it is interesting to learn about all the topics on the policies that have been creating, and especially the interesting thing about how to promote open science in research. What is the motivation? And I really liked the comment that she mentioned about it could be money, it could be the law enforcement, it could be the rank, but it's important for seduction, to make the access to open access, or to make it really accessible for researchers. And I think that this is a really valuable concept. So if it is easy to share your data, more and more researchers are going to be doing it. If it is a really burden and there are a lot of problems and and a lot of bureaucracy behind it, then researchers will probably not be willing to do that. And it is important just to see the final report from the Open Science Policy platform that has been created, and the concept of the FAIR principles when you're performing research from the point of view of the open access. So I recommend you to take a look at these links and to basically follow and to learn more about this, because there are a lot of things. It is a paradigm shift that we are living right now. And I think that more and more you will see that this is coming, especially, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about João Moreira and his nice talk about what is being implemented from the point of view of the policies in Portugal and how to promote this kind of actions. And I think that's the plan is, and for those who have not heard about it, I recommend you to take a look. For instance, this link is for a Nature article who has been just published about the implications and how this is going to affect, how the policy to have all the publications, to have it publicly available, and how this will change things, and it has many implications. So I recommend you to look at this, because more and more countries are now getting involved into this approach. So it is important also to know that the efforts to have repositories, just to have shared data, connection between scientists, which is something also which is promoted by Open Science. The more that we discuss among ourselves, the better our results are going to be. And especially one concept about reproducibility, that's the non-reproducibility of the results is one of the worst things that is happening in science. And this is a big problem that Open Science probably could be the best solution we have so far. The more we talk about ourselves, the better the reproducibility of the results of our research will be. So, and there are, of course, courses that are really interesting to learn about these topics, where I recommend you, and international alliances that are being created just to promote, because this, and I think that this is something that has been discussed as well, this is a global initiative. This approach of open science, it doesn't make sense if it happens only in one country, in one institution, or in one particular region, such as Europe or the US. We have to embrace these kind of policies worldwide, and we have to think in terms of how to make the most of their research and the funds, and how to connect with the society. So I will give the room for Daniel, who is going to talk about other things that have been discussed in this session. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Joaquin. Daniel, you are mute.
Okay, are you hearing me?
Yep.
Okay, I had some technical problems. Okay, thank you, Joaquin, for your summary. I think I have a huge responsibility now because I have been tasked with the closing of this amazing event. I'm going to be very brief because it has been a long afternoon, but very fascinating. I hope that you all enjoyed these brilliant and passionate presentations and the final debate, but I would like to point out a few things. First, I think, well, I'm convinced that, and I expect that you are also convinced that open science is here to stay, and that this is going to impact our lives as researchers. I hope for the good, not for the bad. And that we have to train ourselves to incorporate open science into our research projects and also into our working habits. I think Michael Eisen has demonstrated very passionately that he's an advocate of open access. And I think he has presented the future of scientific publication. I hope that his vision of scientific publication will predominate in the future, and that we have to adapt to that new situation. And the final debate, it has been also very, very interesting. I think the four speakers have given us a very broad vision of how important is scientific communication to the broad public. I think that we have to make an effort to improve our skills as scientists, because I think we need the public to know and to be convinced of our worst benefits to them, because at the end our research projects depend on their taxes, and we also need to improve our communication skill, not only to the broad public, but also to policymakers, because at the end, those are the ones that make the decisions that they will shape the future of society. And I think they need all the information and all the feedback from us to help them to make the right decisions. Well, I would like to end by thanking Zafira and Maria for the perfect organization of this event, and all the speakers and panelists and all the people who had attended. And I would also like to remind you that the event has been recorded and will be available offline in the near future. And just to wish you good luck and good health to everyone, and see you in a future event. So Zafira, it's your turn now.
So we are finished with the event. We hope that you have a very nice rest of the weekend. Thank you very much for making it possible, for connecting from so many places in the world. The success is because of you. Thank you.
Thank you.